Every person who hurt you left something behind, a question, a silence, a sentence you never got to hear. And when the world becomes quiet, that unfinished story can return. You replay the moment. You wonder what you should have said. You ask why they did it. You wait for an apology that may never come, not because you are weak, but because part of you still believes peace must come from the person who caused the pain. We were taught to look for answers, to explain everything, to believe that if we could only understand why someone left, betrayed us, ignored us, or broke our trust, then maybe the pain would finally make sense. But some answers never come. Some people never explain. Some people never admit what they did. And waiting for them to give you closure can quietly keep your heart tied to a door that has already closed. There is another way, a calmer way, a stronger way. You can stop needing their words to heal. You can stop waiting for them to understand your pain. You can let silence be an answer. You can let their actions tell you what their mouth never will. And slowly, the power you gave them begins to return to you. Tonight, that is what this is for. A chance to release the questions that have followed you for too long. A chance to stop asking broken people to repair what they damaged. A chance to let the past stay where it belongs. And by morning, you may discover that the closure you were waiting for was never supposed to come from them. And this is where the real work begins. Because sometimes the hardest person to release is not the one who hurt you. It is the version of them you are still waiting for. The version who finally understands. The version who finally says the words you deserve to hear. The version who looks at you and admits, yes, I hurt you. Yes, you were right to feel that way. Yes, I should have treated you better. That hope can keep a person emotionally trapped for years. You may call it closure. You may say you just want one final conversation, one honest answer, one apology, one moment where everything becomes clear. But underneath that desire, there is often something deeper. You want them to admit what they did. You want them to confirm that you were not too sensitive. You were not asking for too much. You did not make the whole thing up in your head. You want to know that the pain you carried was real enough for them to recognize. And that is understandable. When someone hurts you deeply, especially someone you trusted, the pain is not only in what happened. The pain is also in what happens afterward. They may act as if nothing happened. They may avoid the subject. They may tell a different version of the story. They may say you misunderstood them. They may accuse you of being dramatic. They may move on with their life while you are still trying to understand how someone who once claimed to care about you could leave you with so much confusion. That is when the mind starts searching for a confession. You begin thinking, maybe one day they will finally see it. Maybe age will change them. Maybe life will humble them. Maybe they will experience the same pain and suddenly understand yours. Maybe they will call one evening and say everything you have been waiting to hear. And without realizing it, part of your peace becomes attached to that future moment. This is where closure becomes dangerous. Because now, your healing has a condition. You can heal when they apologize. You can move forward when they admit the truth. You can finally rest when they explain themselves. You can stop thinking about it when they understand what they did. But what if they never do? What if the person who hurt you spends the rest of their life believing they did nothing wrong? What if they remember the story differently? What if they know exactly what they did, but pride will never allow them to say it? What if they apologize only to make themselves feel better? What if they give you words, but those words still do not satisfy you? That is the part people rarely talk about. An apology does not always create peace. Sometimes you finally get the conversation you wanted and leave feeling even more empty. They say, "I'm sorry you felt that way." You wanted responsibility. They gave you distance. They say, "We both made mistakes." You wanted honesty. They gave you shared blame. They say, "That was a long time ago. Why are you still talking about it?" You wanted understanding. They gave you impatience. And suddenly you realize something painful. You were not really waiting for words. You were waiting for transformation. You wanted them to become the kind of person who could fully understand the damage they caused. You wanted them to develop the empathy they did not show before. You wanted them to become emotionally mature enough to look at your pain without defending themselves. But you cannot force that growth. You cannot make another person become honest simply because honesty would help you heal. You cannot drag self-awareness out of someone who has spent years avoiding themselves. And you cannot spend your life standing outside someone else's conscience, knocking on the door. At some point, you have to ask yourself a different question. What if I never get the admission? Not as a hopeless question, as a freeing one. What if you never hear the perfect apology? Could you still build a peaceful life? What if they never understand your side? Could you still trust your own memory? What if they continue telling a story where they are innocent? Could you still know what you experienced? What if they never feel sorry? Could you still become free? That is where healing changes direction. Instead of asking, "When will they admit what they did?" you begin asking, "Why do I need their admission to trust what I already know?" That question can be uncomfortable, because sometimes we have spent so long doubting ourselves that another person's agreement feels like proof. You remember the disrespect, but then you wonder if it was really that bad. You remember the betrayal, but then you question whether you expected too much. You remember how small you felt around them, but then you hear their voice in your mind saying, "You were difficult." So you keep wanting their confession because part of you believes it will finally settle the argument inside your own head. But your experience doesn't become real only when the person who caused it agrees with you. Pain does not need permission to exist. If someone repeatedly lied to you, you do not need them to admit they were dishonest before you are allowed to protect yourself. If someone constantly dismissed your feelings, you do not need them to confess that they were cruel before you are allowed to create distance. If someone abandoned you when you needed them most, you do not need them to explain why before you are allowed to stop waiting. You are allowed to believe what their behavior showed you. That does not mean every memory is perfect. It does not mean you never made mistakes. It simply means you stop giving another person complete authority over the meaning of your own experience. There is a quiet strength in saying, "I know what happened to me, and I no longer need you to agree." That sentence changes something. It takes the courtroom out of your mind. For years you may have been building your case, remembering every conversation, collecting every detail, replaying every moment, preparing the perfect speech. You have been the witness, the lawyer, and the injured person all at once. And the strange part is that the person you are trying to convince may not even be listening. So the trial continues inside you, night after night. But healing begins when you leave the courtroom, not because the truth does not matter, because your life matters more. You stop needing a verdict from someone who may never judge themselves honestly. You stop needing them to say you deserved better before you begin giving yourself better. You stop waiting for them to feel guilty before you allow yourself to feel peaceful. And slowly, closure becomes something different. It is no longer a confession. It is no longer a final message. It is no longer hearing the words, "You were right." Closure becomes the moment you realize their lack of accountability does not have to become your lifetime sentence. You can know what happened. You can learn from it. You can grieve it. You can protect yourself differently in the future. And you can still move forward without their signature at the bottom of the story. Maybe they will apologize one day. Maybe they will not. Maybe they will finally understand. Maybe they never will. But your peace cannot remain parked outside their door. At some point, it has to come home to you. And once you understand that, another truth begins to rise quietly inside you. The person who caused the wound may never be the person capable of helping you heal it. And that is the difficult truth many people discover too late. The person who caused the wound is not always the person who knows how to treat it. Sometimes, going back to them for answers is like returning to the same fire and asking it to explain why you were burned. That is where even more pain can begin. When someone has hurt you deeply, there is often a natural pull to go back to them. You want to ask what happened. You want them to explain their choices. You want to understand what changed. You want them to help you make sense of the damage they left behind. But the source of your pain may be the least reliable guide through it. Not because every person who hurts someone is evil, but because the person who caused the wound often has reasons to protect themselves from the truth of what they did. They may feel shame. They may feel guilt. They may fear looking like the bad person. They may want to protect their reputation. They may want to avoid responsibility. They may have spent so long telling themselves a certain version of the story that they now believe it completely. And when you return looking for clarity, you may walk straight into their defenses. This is where confusion begins. You come with a simple question. Why did you treat me that way? But instead of an honest answer, you hear something that leaves you doubting yourself. You took it the wrong way. That's not what happened. You always make things bigger than they are. You were difficult too. I don't remember saying that. You pushed me to do it. Now the conversation has changed. You came to understand your pain, but suddenly you are defending whether your pain was even valid. This is one of the most exhausting places a wounded person can end up. You start with a question about their behavior and somehow leave questioning your own memory. That is not healing. That is emotional fog. And emotional fog can be more damaging than silence, because at least silence leaves the event where it happened. Manipulation can rewrite it. Some people know exactly how to move a conversation away from what they did. They shift the focus. They bring up your mistakes. They remind you of something you said years ago. They accuse you of being unforgiving. They tell you that you are obsessed with the past. And suddenly the person who hurt you is standing in the role of the wounded one. You may even find yourself apologizing. Think about how strange that is. You entered the conversation carrying the injury, and you leave carrying guilt. That is why returning to someone for emotional repair can be dangerous when that person has never shown the ability to take responsibility. Healing requires honesty, but not everyone is emotionally built for honest reflection. Some people survive by avoiding it. They explain everything away. They blame circumstances. They blame childhood. They blame stress. They blame alcohol. They blame pressure. They blame you. And while some of those things may help explain behavior, explanation is not the same as responsibility. A storm can explain why a tree fell, but it does not rebuild the house. In the same way, understanding why someone behaved badly does not automatically repair what their behavior did to you. This is where people often become trapped. They think, if I can just understand them deeply enough, maybe I can finally feel better. So they keep studying the person who hurt them. They study their childhood, their fears, their habits, their past relationships, their family, their insecurities, their moods, their patterns. They become experts on someone else while slowly becoming strangers to themselves. But healing does not require you to understand every hidden reason behind another person's behavior. Sometimes the reason is simply that they made a harmful choice. Sometimes they were selfish. Sometimes they were emotionally immature. Sometimes they wanted what they wanted and did not care enough about the cost to you. Sometimes there is no beautiful explanation. And that can be hard to accept because complicated explanations feel safer than simple truths. A complicated explanation gives the mind something to work on. A simple truth gives the heart something to accept. And acceptance can feel much harder. There is another danger in asking the person who hurt you to help you heal. They may offer just enough comfort to keep you attached. A small apology, a warm message, a moment of regret, a sentence that sounds different this time, and suddenly hope returns. You begin thinking maybe they have changed, maybe now they understand, maybe this time things will be different. But if their behavior has not changed, those words can become another thread, tying you back to the same cycle. This is especially painful in relationships where hurt and comfort came from the same person. They wounded you. Then they soothed you. They disappointed you. Then they became tender. They pulled away. Then they returned. They broke trust. Then they promised change. That pattern can make the heart confused because the same person becomes connected to both pain and relief. So when you hurt, you want to go back to them, not because they are safe, because your mind learned that they are also the person who sometimes makes the pain quieter. That is a difficult pattern to break. You begin to confuse relief with healing, but relief is temporary. Healing changes the structure underneath. Relief says, I feel better because they called me. Healing says, whether they call or not, I am steady. Relief says, they apologized, so maybe everything is okay. Healing says, I can accept the apology without ignoring the pattern. Relief depends on what they do next. Healing slowly stops depending on them at all. There is power in learning to separate those two, because many people return to harmful relationships not because they have forgotten the pain, but because they are desperate for relief from it. And the person who hurt them knows exactly how to provide just enough comfort to reopen the door. That does not always mean the person is deliberately cruel. Sometimes they are confused too. Sometimes they miss you. Sometimes they feel lonely. Sometimes they regret losing access to you more than they regret how they treated you. Those are very different things. Someone missing you does not automatically mean they have changed. Someone crying does not automatically mean they have become safe. Someone saying, I made mistakes, does not always mean they fully understand those mistakes. Real change is not measured by emotional words. It is measured by different behavior over time. And that is one of the strongest protections you can give yourself. Stop listening only for the right sentence. Start watching for the right pattern. A person may say they respect you. Do their choices show respect? They may say they understand. Do they stop repeating what hurt you? They may say they are sorry. Do they become more honest? They may say they want peace. Do they stop creating chaos? Behavior gives answers that words often hide. That is why distance can sometimes provide more clarity than another conversation. When you step back, you begin to see things without being pulled into the emotion of the moment. You notice patterns you excused before. You remember how often you felt anxious. You notice how carefully you had to choose your words. You remember how many times you accepted less just to keep the peace. You start seeing the relationship from outside the storm. And from that distance, some things become painfully obvious. You were not confused because you lacked intelligence. You were confused because the situation itself was confusing. Mixed signals create confusion. Broken promises create confusion. Warm words followed by cold behavior create confusion. Affection mixed with disrespect creates confusion. Your mind was trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces kept changing, so stop blaming yourself for not understanding it sooner. Clarity often comes when the pattern stops moving, and sometimes the safest way to let that happen is to stop asking the person inside the pattern to explain it. There are other places to heal. You can heal through honest reflection. You can heal through trusted friends who know how to listen without controlling your choices. You can heal through writing down what happened and reading it back without their voice interrupting your memory. You can heal through quiet routines that help your body feel safe again. You can heal by noticing what you ignored before and deciding what you will never ignore again. You can heal through boundaries that protect the version of you that is still becoming stronger. And sometimes you may need professional support if the wound is deep, especially when the relationship involved fear, control, or long-term emotional harm. Healing does not have to happen in the same place where the damage began. That may be one of the most important truths to carry forward. A cut does not return to the knife for recovery. A burned hand does not need permission from the flame, and your heart does not need to keep visiting the person who broke it just because part of you still wants them to become someone different. You can care about them and still step away. You can forgive parts of the story and still protect yourself. You can understand their pain and still refuse to keep receiving it. You can wish them well without giving them access to your peace. And slowly, something changes. You stop asking them to explain who they are. You start believing what their pattern already showed you. You stop returning for comfort that comes with a cost. You start building comfort inside a life that does not require their presence. And once that happens, another quiet truth begins to appear. Sometimes the answer you were searching for was never hidden inside their explanation. Sometimes it was already sitting inside their silence. And once you stop returning to them for answers, something strange can happen. They may no longer be in front of you. The conversation may be over. The relationship may have ended months or even years ago. Yet inside your mind, the story keeps moving. The ending plays again. The last conversation. The moment they walked away. The message you received. The words you wish you had said. And sometimes you begin to wonder, why am I still thinking about this? Do I still love them? Maybe that is not what is happening at all. Sometimes your heart has already accepted that someone is gone, while your mind is still trying to understand how the story ended. The human mind does not like unfinished things. It wants patterns to make sense. It wants a beginning, a middle, and an ending it can understand. When something suddenly stops without explanation, the mind can behave like a person reading a book only to discover that the final pages have been torn out. You know the story is over, but something inside you keeps looking for the missing pages. That is why a memory can return when you are washing dishes. It can appear while you are driving. It can visit just before you fall asleep. You may be having a perfectly normal day when suddenly your mind says, "But why did they do that?" And there you are again, back inside a moment that happened long ago. This does not always mean you want the person back. It does not always mean you have failed to move on. It may simply mean your mind has found something it cannot neatly place on the shelf. Think about what happens when an ordinary question has no answer. Someone says, "I need to tell you something important," and then becomes distracted. What happens inside you? You want to know what they were going to say. Even if the information is not important, the unfinished sentence stays in your attention. Now take that same feeling and attach it to betrayal, abandonment, rejection, or heartbreak. The pull becomes much stronger. Your mind is no longer trying to complete a sentence. It is trying to complete an emotional story. That is why people sometimes replay events hundreds of times. They are searching the memory for something they missed. Was there a warning? Did their voice change? Was that argument actually the beginning of the end? Should I have noticed something earlier? What did that strange comment mean? Could I have stopped it? The mind becomes a detective returning to the same room, hoping that this time it will find the clue that explains everything. But there is a problem. Some emotional stories do not contain enough information to be solved. You can replay a 5-minute conversation 5,000 times and still have only 5 minutes of information. Repetition does not create new evidence. It only makes the old evidence more familiar. And this is where mental replay can quietly become exhausting. You think you are getting closer to an answer, but sometimes you are simply walking around the same room. The furniture has not changed. The door is still in the same place. The missing piece is still missing. There is another reason the mind returns to painful endings. It wants to protect you. After something deeply hurts us, the mind often asks, "How can I make sure this never happens again?" So it studies the event. It searches for danger signs. It looks for moments when you should have known. It tries to create rules. Never trust someone who does this. Always leave when someone says that. Next time, notice this sooner. Part of that process can be useful. Pain can teach. Experience can sharpen judgment. But there is a point where learning ends and punishment begins. You have learned what you needed to learn, yet you keep forcing yourself to watch the lesson again and again and again. It is like watching security camera footage of a robbery after you already know exactly what was taken. At first you watch because you want information. Eventually you are simply watching yourself get hurt. That is when you need to recognize the difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection moves somewhere. It asks, "What did this experience teach me?" Then it uses the answer. Rumination keeps circling. It asks, "Why? Why? Why?" Without accepting that some questions may never produce a satisfying response. Reflection leaves you wiser. Rumination often leaves you tired. Reflection may hurt, but eventually it opens a door. Rumination can keep you standing in the hallway. And there is something else you need to hear tonight. Missing an explanation is not the same as missing a person. Those two feelings can look very similar. You may think about someone every day and believe that means they still belong in your life. But pay attention to what you are actually thinking about. Are you remembering their laugh, their kindness, the peaceful moments you shared? Or are you repeatedly thinking about what happened at the end? Are you longing for the relationship, or are you longing for the confusion to stop? There is a difference. You can be completely finished with a person and still be mentally unfinished with the experience. That distinction can bring enormous relief. Because people sometimes return to relationships they should leave behind simply because they mistake unanswered questions for love. They think, "I can't stop thinking about them, so maybe this relationship isn't over." But perhaps the relationship is over. Perhaps the unanswered story is what remains, and going back to the person will not necessarily finish that story. It may simply begin another painful chapter. There are times when the most healing thing you can do is create an ending yourself. Not a false ending. Not a story where you pretend nothing happened. A truthful ending built from what you actually know. You may never know exactly why they betrayed you, but you know they betrayed your trust. You may never understand why they disappeared, but you know they chose not to communicate with care. You may never discover what they were thinking, but you know how their behavior affected your life. Those facts may be enough. Your mind wants every blank filled in. Healing sometimes means saying, "I can live with a few blank spaces." That is maturity, because real life does not always give us beautiful endings. Some friendships simply fade. Some marriages end with questions. Some family members never explain themselves. Some people die before important conversations happen. Some people leave while you are still trying to understand what changed. If peace required every human story to have a perfect ending, very few people would ever know peace. So you learn another way. You stop trying to solve the person. You begin completing the lesson. Ask yourself, what do I know now that I did not know before? Maybe you know you should not ignore repeated disrespect. Maybe you know that consistency matters more than promises. Maybe you know that loneliness can make you tolerate things you would normally reject. Maybe you know that your instincts were speaking long before you listened. Maybe you know that you deserve relationships where you do not have to constantly guess how someone feels about you. Take the lesson, leave the mystery. The lesson can travel with you. The mystery does not have to. And when the memory returns, you do not have to fight it. Fighting a thought can sometimes make it louder. Instead, notice what your mind is doing. There is that story again. Not, I am weak. Not, I must still love them. Not, I will never get over this. Just, my mind is looking for an ending. Then gently remind yourself that the ending has already happened. You are here. That chapter is behind you. You survived the confusion. You learned something from the pain, and there may be nothing more you need to solve tonight. The memory may return tomorrow. That does not mean you have gone backward. A thought returning is only a thought returning. You do not have to enter it every time it knocks. You can let it pass through your awareness without turning it into another hour of investigation. Little by little, your mind learns something new. It learns that uncertainty is not danger. It learns that unanswered questions can remain unanswered without destroying your peace. It learns that not every puzzle deserves the rest of your life. And one day, the memory comes back differently. It no longer feels like an emergency. You remember what happened, but you do not feel compelled to solve it. The question still exists, but the hunger for an answer has faded. You can finally say, I may never know. And for the first time, those words do not feel frightening. They feel like freedom, because perhaps you were never trapped by the person as much as you were trapped by the unfinished story. And once you stop demanding that every story give you the ending you wanted, you begin to notice something even more powerful. Sometimes the silence you hated so much was already telling you everything you needed to know. And once you understand that not every unfinished story needs to be solved, something else becomes easier to see. Sometimes the answer was never missing. Sometimes it was sitting quietly in front of you the whole time. Their silence, the unanswered message, the avoided conversation, the way they disappeared when responsibility arrived, the way they became distant the moment honesty was required. Silence can hurt because it feels empty, but sometimes it is not empty at all. Sometimes silence is carrying information you were not ready to accept. When someone refuses to answer you, you may spend days wondering what their silence means. Are they confused? Are they scared? Are they thinking? Do they need time? Will they come back? Did you say something wrong? The mind can create 100 explanations because uncertainty is uncomfortable, and sometimes those explanations are kinder than the truth. But silence can reveal things words often hide. It can reveal avoidance. It can reveal emotional immaturity. It can reveal fear of responsibility. It can reveal that a person does not know how to sit with discomfort. It can reveal that they would rather disappear than face the consequences of their choices. That matters, because how someone behaves when things become difficult often tells you more than how they behave when everything is easy. Anyone can be warm when nothing is being asked of them. Anyone can be kind when there is no conflict. Anyone can say beautiful things when the relationship is comfortable. But what happens when they hurt you? Do they stay? Do they listen? Do they answer hard questions? Do they allow you to speak without turning everything into an attack on themselves? Do they try to understand what their actions did? Or do they vanish? That moment tells you something important about their emotional capacity, not their value as a human being, their capacity. And those are different things. A person can have good qualities and still be unable to handle accountability. They can be charming and still avoid difficult conversations. They can love you in some way and still lack the emotional strength needed to repair harm. They can care and still be unsafe for your heart. This is where many people become confused. They say, "But I know they are a good person." Maybe they are, but goodness alone does not create a healthy relationship. You also need honesty, consistency, responsibility, emotional presence, the ability to stay when the conversation becomes uncomfortable. A person may be generous with gifts and poor with truth. They may be funny and terrible at conflict. They may be affectionate and unable to admit when they are wrong. They may be deeply wounded themselves and still wound everyone around them. So when they go silent, do not rush to fill the silence with excuses. Watch what it is showing you. There is a difference between someone taking healthy space and someone using silence to escape responsibility. Healthy space usually has communication around it. I need some time to think. I am upset, but I want to talk when I am calmer. I cannot answer this well right now, but I will come back to it. That is distance with respect. Avoidance feels different. No explanation, no return, no willingness to address what happened, no concern for the emotional mess left behind. That kind of silence can feel cruel because you are left carrying both the original pain and the confusion that follows it. And there is an even more painful kind. Silence used as control. Some people withdraw communication because they know it makes you anxious. They know you will reach out. They know you will start apologizing. They know you will question yourself. They know that if they become cold enough, you may abandon your own needs just to restore contact. That is not peace. That is power being used through absence. And once you recognize it, the silence changes meaning. Instead of asking, "How do I get them to talk to me?" you begin asking, "Why am I chasing someone who uses communication like a reward?" That question can save you years, because healthy communication is not something you should have to earn by becoming smaller. You should not have to silence your needs to avoid being ignored. You should not have to apologize for bringing up something painful just to make someone return. You should not have to perform emotional gymnastics so another person will finally speak. If communication disappears every time truth appears, that pattern is telling you something. And sometimes that pattern is clearer than any explanation they could give. There are also people who disappear because they cannot tolerate shame. The moment they realize they have hurt someone, they shut down. They avoid calls, they stop replying, they stay busy, they change the subject. They tell themselves the problem will go away if enough time passes. This does not always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from emotional weakness, but emotional weakness can still cause damage. And this is important. You do not have to hate someone to recognize that they do not have the capacity to give you what you need. You do not have to turn them into a monster. You simply have to stop asking them to become something they have repeatedly shown they are not ready to be. That is a different kind of strength. It is quieter, less dramatic, more truthful. You stop arguing with reality. You stop saying, "But they should be able to talk about this." Maybe they should. But can they? You stop saying, "They should care enough to explain." Maybe they should. But have they? You stop building your decisions around who someone could be and start building them around who they consistently are. That shift can change your whole life. because hope can become dangerous when it keeps you loyal to potential instead of reality. You may be waiting for the conversation that proves they have changed, but their avoidance is already showing you where they are. You may be waiting for the apology that proves they understand, but their refusal to engage is already showing you how much emotional work they are willing to do. You may be waiting for one final answer, but their silence may already be saying, "I cannot meet you here." And that may be the answer, painful, incomplete, not the answer you wanted, but still an answer. There is something freeing about accepting that, because once silence becomes information, you no longer have to chase it. You stop sending one more message. You stop checking whether they have replied. You stop rehearsing what you will say if they come back. You stop giving your emotional energy to a conversation that only exists in your mind. That energy begins returning to you, and with it comes dignity, not pride. Dignity, the quiet understanding that your need for clarity does not require you to beg for basic communication. You can care deeply and still refuse to chase. You can feel hurt and still remain still. You can want an answer and still decide that the absence of one has told you enough. That is not giving up. That is reading the situation clearly. Sometimes closure is not receiving the explanation. Sometimes closure is noticing who disappeared when honesty entered the room. Sometimes closure is seeing who became defensive when accountability arrived. Sometimes closure is recognizing that the person you kept waiting for was showing you, through absence, the limit of what they could offer. And when you finally see that limit, something inside you becomes quieter. You stop asking silence to turn into words. You stop treating avoidance like a mystery. You stop confusing emotional absence with depth, and you begin trusting what behavior has already revealed. Because people often tell you who they are without speaking. They tell you by what they avoid, by what they refuse to face, by what they leave you carrying alone, by whether they stay present when your pain makes the room uncomfortable. And once you learn to listen to that kind of answer, you become much harder to confuse. You begin to understand that the problem was not always that you failed to explain yourself clearly enough. Sometimes you were trying to be understood by someone who did not have the emotional room to understand you at all. And that realization leads to an even deeper question. What if you have been trying to understand their behavior through your own values, when they were never operating from the same values in the first place? And once you stop treating silence like a mystery, another truth becomes easier to face. Sometimes the reason their behavior never made sense to you is because you kept trying to understand it through your own heart. You asked, how could they do that? But what you were really asking was, how could I ever do that? And those are not the same question. This is where many people lose years. They keep studying another person's behavior as if there must be a hidden explanation that will finally make it feel reasonable. They search for the missing piece, the childhood wound, the fear, the stress, the pressure, the misunderstanding. Anything that can make the behavior fit inside a world they understand. But sometimes it does not fit because the other person was not guided by the same values you were. You may have been thinking with empathy. They may have been thinking about convenience. You may have been thinking about loyalty. They may have been thinking about what they wanted in that moment. You may have been thinking, how will this affect them? They may have been thinking, how do I get what I want? That difference matters because if you are a deeply caring person, you can accidentally assume everyone has the same inner brakes you do. You assume that if something would make you feel guilty, it would make them feel guilty too. You assume that if betraying someone would keep you awake at night, it must trouble them in the same way. You assume that if you made a promise, you would feel responsible for keeping it. So when someone breaks that promise easily, your mind struggles. You say, but they knew how much this meant to me. Yes, they may have known. Knowing is not always the same as caring enough to act differently. That is one of the hardest truths to accept. Sometimes people understand the pain they are causing and still choose what benefits them. Not because they are confused, not because you failed to explain it well enough, because their values in that moment were different from yours. This is why endless analysis becomes dangerous. You keep searching for innocence where there may have only been selfishness. You keep searching for misunderstanding where there may have been a choice. You keep searching for some secret pain that will make the behavior easier to forgive. And while compassion is valuable, compassion without clear sight can become self-betrayal. There is nothing wrong with understanding someone's background. Their history matters. Their wounds matter. Their fears matter. But explanation should not erase observation. A person can have a painful past and still be responsible for how they treat you. A person can struggle emotionally and still make harmful choices. A person can have reasons for their behavior without those reasons becoming permission. That distinction can protect you, because people with strong empathy sometimes make a serious mistake. They spend more time understanding the person who hurt them than understanding what the hurt did to them. They say, he had a difficult childhood. She has trust issues. They were under pressure. They never learned how to communicate. All of that may be true. But another question matters too. What happened to you while you were constantly making room for their pain? Did you become anxious? Did you stop trusting yourself? Did you start walking carefully around their moods? Did you lower your standards? Did you become afraid to speak honestly? Did you spend more time managing their emotions than living your own life? That information matters. Because empathy should not require you to disappear. There is a difference between understanding someone and abandoning yourself for them. You can say, I understand why you became this way, and still say, I cannot allow this behavior in my life. Both can be true. That is emotional maturity. It does not need hatred. It does not need revenge. It does not even need anger. It needs clear sight. And clear sight means recognizing that not everyone is making decisions from the same inner code. Think about loyalty. To some people, loyalty means staying honest even when temptation appears. To others, loyalty lasts only while the relationship feels easy. Think about honesty. To you, honesty may mean telling the truth even when it costs you something. To someone else, honesty may mean telling only enough truth to avoid consequences. Think about empathy. You may naturally picture how your actions will affect another person. Someone else may not think that far, or they may think about it and still choose themselves. This does not mean every difference in values makes someone bad. It means differences in values create different behavior. And when you keep expecting your values to appear inside someone who does not share them, confusion follows. You say, I would never do that to them. Exactly. You would not, but they did. That sentence may be more useful than hours of analysis. I would never do that to them, but they were willing to do it to me. There is information there, not information about your worth. Information about the gap between your standards and theirs. Once you see that gap, the story starts becoming simpler. You stop asking, how could someone who loved me do this? You begin asking, what did their choices show me about how they understand love? That is a different question. It moves you away from fantasy. Because love is not only a feeling, it is behavior. Someone can feel attached to you and still treat you badly. Someone can miss you and still disrespect you. Someone can want you in their life and still refuse to become trustworthy. Feelings do not automatically create character. And that is another reason people get trapped. They think, but I know they cared. Maybe they did, but caring is not always enough. You can care about someone and still be too selfish to protect them. You can care and still lie. You can care and still choose comfort over honesty. You can care and still avoid responsibility. This is why you have to look beyond what someone feels. Look at what guides them when feelings become inconvenient. That is where values appear. Values are not what we say when everything is calm. Values are what we choose when telling the truth costs us something, when loyalty becomes difficult, when temptation appears, when pride is challenged, when admitting fault would hurt our image. That is when character becomes visible. And once you understand this, you can stop torturing yourself with questions that have no useful answer. Why didn't they think about how much this would hurt me? Maybe they did, and chose anyway. Why didn't they tell me the truth? Because protecting themselves mattered more to them in that moment. Why didn't they stay loyal after everything I did? Because your loyalty did not automatically create loyalty inside them. That can sound cold, but sometimes a clean truth hurts less than a comforting lie repeated for years. Because when you stop assuming that everyone is guided by your conscience, you become better at reading behavior. You stop being shocked every time someone acts unlike you. You stop giving endless chances simply because you would want a chance yourself. You stop assuming an apology means the same thing to them that it means to you. You start watching what happens next, and something powerful changes. You begin trusting patterns more than promises. You begin noticing whether someone's values are actually compatible with yours, not whether they are charming, not whether you have history, not whether they say they love you. Whether the way they live matches the kind of relationship you need. That question can save your peace, because sometimes the pain was not caused by one terrible moment. It was caused by trying to build something deep with someone whose values could not support the weight of it. And no amount of analysis can turn incompatible character into safety. You cannot think hard enough to make someone more honest. You cannot love deeply enough to give someone empathy they refuse to practice. You cannot stay loyal enough for two people. You cannot become so understanding that another person suddenly grows a conscience. At some point, understanding must turn toward yourself. What do you value? What kind of honesty do you need? What kind of loyalty do you offer? What kind of treatment can your nervous system live peacefully around? What are you no longer willing to explain away? Those questions bring you home. Because healing is not always about solving another person. Sometimes healing is finally learning who you are when you stop making excuses for who they chose to be. And once you see that clearly, another lesson begins to rise. You can understand exactly why someone became the way they are, and still decide that their reasons do not excuse what they did to you. And this is where compassion needs a boundary. Because once you understand that someone may not have been guided by the same values you were, it becomes tempting to explain everything for them. You learn about their childhood, their fears, their losses, their insecurity, their wounds, and suddenly the pain they caused begins to feel easier to excuse. But understanding is not the same as permission. You can understand why someone became distant without accepting the way they abandoned you. You can understand why someone became controlling without accepting the way they made you feel small. You can understand why someone learned to lie without pretending the lies did not damage your trust. That distinction can change the way you heal, because compassionate people often confuse two very different things. One is asking, "What happened to this person?" The other is saying, "Because something happened to them, I must tolerate what they do to me." Those are not the same. A painful childhood can explain why someone struggles with closeness. It does not give them the right to punish you for wanting connection. Past betrayal can explain why someone has trust issues. It does not give them permission to monitor, accuse, control, or constantly test you. Fear of abandonment can explain why someone becomes anxious. It does not excuse threats, manipulation, or making you responsible for calming every fear they carry. Understanding helps you see the full picture. Excusing removes responsibility from it. And there is a big difference. Think about a person who grew up in a home where no one apologized. Maybe mistakes were hidden. Maybe weakness was mocked. Maybe anger was the only emotion anyone knew how to show. It would make sense if that person later struggled to admit when they were wrong. You can understand that. You can even feel compassion for it. But when they hurt you and refuse to take responsibility, their history does not erase the effect on you. Their childhood may explain the wall. You still have to decide whether you can live behind it. That is the part many people forget. You are not only trying to understand how someone became who they are, you are also deciding what their behavior means for your life. And those are two separate tasks. You can have deep empathy for someone's pain and still recognize that being close to them is costing you too much. You can care about the child they once were and still protect the adult you are now. You can say, "I see why this is hard for you," without saying, "So I will keep accepting it." That is not cruelty. That is wisdom. There is something else that happens when you know someone's wounds. You begin anticipating them. You know what triggers them. You know what makes them shut down. You know what makes them angry. You know what makes them feel rejected. So you start adjusting yourself around their pain. You speak more carefully. You ask for less. You avoid certain subjects. You wait for the right mood. You forgive things quickly because you know what they have been through. At first, this may feel like love, but over time, you may notice something. Their wounds are taking up all the space, and your needs are disappearing. That is when empathy becomes dangerous. Not because empathy is wrong, because empathy without limits can train you to abandon yourself. You become so focused on protecting them from discomfort that no one is protecting you from harm. You say, "I know they did not mean it, but did it hurt?" You say, "They are going through a lot." But how long have you been going through a lot because of them? You say, "They cannot help it." But have they tried to learn? Have they taken responsibility? Have they sought support? Have they changed anything? Those questions matter, because limitation is not the same as refusal. Someone may truly struggle with communication, but do they try? Someone may struggle with anger, but do they take steps to control it? Someone may be afraid of intimacy, but do they use that fear as a reason to keep hurting you? Someone may carry deep wounds, but do they treat those wounds like a responsibility to heal, or like a permanent excuse everyone else must live around? That tells you something. A person's past deserves compassion. Their present choices still deserve accountability. Both truths can sit in the same room. You do not have to choose between them. You do not have to say, "They are terrible." You also do not have to say, "They could not help it." Sometimes the healthiest sentence is much simpler. "I understand why this may be difficult for them, and I still cannot accept how they treated me." That sentence has balance. It keeps your heart open without leaving your life unprotected. And this matters because people sometimes believe boundaries mean they have stopped caring. They think, "If I really understood them, I would stay." Not necessarily. Sometimes understanding is exactly why you leave. You understand that they are not ready. You understand that they repeat the same pattern. You understand that your presence is not changing it. You understand that love is not enough to do their healing for them. And you understand that staying may only teach them that they can continue behaving the same way without losing access to you. That is not always kindness. Sometimes consequences are part of reality. When someone repeatedly hurts people and everyone keeps explaining it away, they may never be forced to face themselves. Every excuse becomes a cushion. Every second chance becomes protection from the result of their choices. Every time someone says they had a hard life, the person escapes another opportunity to grow. Compassion should not become a hiding place for bad behavior. And you are not required to become that hiding place. This is especially important when someone uses their pain as a shield. I act this way because of what happened to me. Maybe that is true, but the sentence should not end there. A healthier version sounds different. This is what happened to me, and I'm responsible for making sure I do not keep passing that pain forward. That is maturity. Pain may not be your fault, but what you do with pain becomes your responsibility. And that applies to everyone, the person who hurt you, and you. You may have been wounded by their behavior. Now your task is to decide what happens next. Will you spend years carrying anger into every new relationship? Will you become suspicious of everyone? Will you punish safe people for what unsafe people did? Or will you take responsibility for healing what was handed to you? That does not mean taking blame for being hurt. It means refusing to let the wound become your identity. This is how cycles end. Someone hurts you. You face it. You learn from it. You protect yourself. You heal. And you make a decision not to become what hurt you. That is very different from pretending the pain never happened. It means using pain without becoming ruled by it. There is also freedom in understanding that forgiveness, if you choose it, does not require access. You may forgive someone internally and still never speak to them again. You may release your anger and still keep the boundary. You may wish them healing and still refuse to return. Forgiveness does not mean pretending trust was never broken. It does not mean giving someone the same position in your life they had before, and it does not mean removing consequences. Sometimes forgiveness simply means, I no longer want to carry hatred, but I have learned what I needed to learn. That can be enough. You do not owe anyone endless closeness simply because you understand their story. Their story can soften your anger. It does not have to erase your standards. You can recognize their wounds. You can recognize their fear. You can recognize the limits they were given and still say, this stops with me. That may be one of the most powerful forms of healing, because now you are no longer trying to decide whether they were hurt enough to justify hurting you. You are deciding what treatment you will allow in your life, and that is a question you can actually answer. You cannot rewrite their childhood. You cannot remove their fear. You cannot give them emotional skills they refuse to build. You cannot love them into accountability, but you can stop confusing compassion with surrender. You can stop carrying the cost of wounds that were never yours to fix. And once you learn to do that, something surprising becomes clear. You may not need the perfect final conversation after all, because sometimes the conversation you have been waiting for exists more beautifully in your mind than it ever could in real life. And once you stop using someone's past to excuse what they did, another illusion begins to fall away, the one where you believe there is still one perfect conversation waiting somewhere in the future, a conversation where they finally understand, where they listen without interrupting, where they admit everything, where you say exactly what you needed to say, where they look at you with regret and suddenly all the pain inside you settles. It sounds peaceful, but real conversations rarely follow the script we write in our minds. When you have been hurt, the mind often creates a scene of emotional justice. You picture yourself speaking calmly and clearly. You picture them finally seeing the damage. You picture the moment their face changes because they understand. And in that private version of the conversation, everything lands exactly where it should. But the person in your mind is often more emotionally available than the person in real life. That is the problem. You may be preparing for a conversation with someone who exists only in your hopes. The real person may become defensive. They may deny details. They may interrupt. They may change the subject. They may accuse you of attacking them. They may say they remember things differently. They may reduce months or years of pain into one sentence. That is not what happened. And suddenly, the conversation you believed would free you becomes another place where you have to fight to be understood. This is why confrontation does not always create closure. Sometimes it creates a second wound. You entered the conversation carrying the original pain. Now you leave carrying disappointment about the conversation too. That can feel worse because you thought this was supposed to be the ending. You thought this was the moment everything would finally make sense. Instead, you have new questions. Why would they deny something so obvious? How can they remember it that way? Did they ever know me at all? Do they really believe what they are saying? Should I have explained it differently? And now the mind has even more material to replay. This is where defensiveness becomes important to understand. When people feel accused, even when the accusation is fair, many do not become more honest. They become more protective. They protect their image. They protect their pride. They protect the story they tell themselves about who they are. Very few people enjoy seeing themselves as the person who caused serious harm. So instead of facing the full truth, they may soften it. I was going through a difficult time. I never meant to hurt you. You know I cared about you. I made mistakes, but so did you. Notice what happens. The focus begins moving away from impact. They start explaining intention. But intention and impact are not the same. Someone can say, I never meant to hurt you, and still have hurt you deeply. The absence of cruel intention does not erase the result. Yet in difficult conversations, people often use intention as a shield. They believe that because they did not mean to cause pain, they should not have to carry responsibility for it. That can leave you feeling invisible all over again. Then there is minimization. This is when the event becomes smaller in their telling. You remember months of emotional distance. They remember a rough patch. You remember repeated lies. They remember a few mistakes. You remember feeling constantly disrespected. They say, we just had different communication styles. And now you are sitting across from someone describing a completely different relationship. That can be deeply unsettling, because you may start asking yourself whether you are exaggerating. But two people can experience the same relationship very differently, and sometimes one person has a strong reason to remember it in a way that protects them from guilt. This is where revisionist history appears. The past begins changing in the conversation. Suddenly, events are placed in a different order. Details disappear. Important moments become misunderstandings. Their choices are explained as reactions to yours. They may even tell the story in a way where they were the one who was forced into everything. You hear things you barely recognize, and you think, were we even in the same relationship? That experience can make you feel almost dizzy, because you came looking for shared reality. Instead, you discovered two separate versions of the past. This is why one final conversation can become dangerous when you expect it to produce agreement. Agreement may never come, and if your peace depends on both of you seeing the story the same way, you may leave even more frustrated. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept that your memories do not need to match perfectly for you to make a decision about what happened. You can say, they remember it differently, and still trust what you experienced. You can accept that they have their version without allowing it to erase yours. That is a much quieter kind of strength. There is another fantasy hidden inside the final conversation. You may believe that if you say the perfect words, you can make them understand. So you rehearse, you edit, you think of stronger examples. You plan exactly how to speak so they will not become defensive. You try to make your pain easy for them to receive, but there is a limit to what language can do. Perfect communication cannot create emotional capacity where none exists. You can explain yourself beautifully to someone who has already decided not to hear you. You can speak gently to someone who still experiences accountability as an attack. You can offer facts to someone committed to protecting their version of the story. At some point, better wording stops being the answer. This matters because many people blame themselves after failed conversations. If only I had stayed calmer. If only I had explained it differently. If only I had waited for a better time. Maybe none of that would have changed the outcome. Maybe the conversation failed because the other person was not ready to participate honestly. That is not something you can control. And there is still another possibility. They may apologize exactly the way you hoped. They may say the words. They may cry. They may admit they were wrong. And you may still not feel the relief you expected. That can be shocking, because for years you believed the apology was the missing key. Then you finally receive it and discover the door was never locked by that alone. Why? Because some pain goes deeper than language. An apology cannot give you back lost years. It cannot erase nights you spent crying. It cannot rebuild trust instantly. It cannot undo the choices you made while hurt. It cannot turn the person back into who you thought they were. The apology may matter. It may even help. But it may not create the complete emotional release you imagined. And that is not failure. It simply means healing is larger than one conversation. Sometimes the fantasy of the final conversation is really a fantasy of going backward, not consciously. But part of you wants the conversation to repair the past so completely that the pain almost stops having happened. You want the story to change meaning. You want betrayal to become regret. You want abandonment to become understanding. You want loss to become something beautiful enough to justify what it cost you. But some experiences cannot be made beautiful. They can only be integrated. You accept that they happened. You take what they taught you. You stop fighting reality. And you build something healthier afterward. That may not feel dramatic. There may be no tears, no long speech, no final hug, no cinematic ending. Sometimes closure is much quieter than that. It is deciding that you no longer need to explain yourself to someone who has already shown they cannot hold the truth with care. It is choosing not to send the message you have rewritten 20 times. It is deleting the speech from your mind. It is allowing the conversation to remain unfinished because your life does not have to remain unfinished with it. There is freedom in that. You no longer wait for the perfect moment. You no longer need them to become receptive. You no longer build your healing around a scene that may never happen the way you want. And if a conversation does happen one day, you can enter it differently. Not begging for closure, not depending on a certain response, not asking them to give you back your peace. You can simply speak your truth because it is yours to speak. And whatever they do with it becomes information. If they listen, you notice. If they become defensive, you notice. If they minimize, you notice. If they take responsibility, you notice. But your peace does not rise or fall with their reaction. That is the difference. You are no longer trying to control the ending. You are allowing reality to show you what is there. And sometimes reality reveals something unexpected. You were not only grieving the person, you were grieving the future you thought that person was going to be part of. And once the fantasy of that perfect final conversation begins to fade, another kind of grief becomes visible. A quieter grief. One that is easy to misunderstand. Because sometimes you do not miss the person as much as you miss the life you thought you were going to have with them. That difference can explain why letting go feels so much harder than it seems like it should. You may know the relationship was painful. You may know trust was broken. You may even know that going back would not be good for you. Yet something inside you still aches. And you wonder, if I know they were wrong for me, why does losing them still hurt this much? Because you did not only lose a person, you may have lost a future you had already started living inside your mind. You saw holidays together, birthdays, Sunday mornings, family dinners, trips you had not taken yet, a home that would slowly fill with memories, children growing older, grandchildren visiting, ordinary evenings when nothing exciting happened, but someone familiar was sitting beside you. You may have pictured growing old together, 2 chairs on a porch, 2 cups of coffee in the morning, someone who knew your stories because they had lived through many of them with you, someone beside you when the children moved away, someone to sit with you in waiting rooms, someone to laugh with about the strange changes that come with age. You were not only attached to who they were, you were attached to who you believed the 2 of you would become. That is why betrayal can feel like several losses happening at once. There is the loss of trust, the loss of the relationship, and then there is the loss of everything you thought the relationship was leading toward. That last loss is often invisible. No one sees the vacation that will never happen. No one sees the anniversary you thought you would celebrate. No one sees the kitchen you thought you would grow old cooking in together. No one sees the family traditions that existed only in your hopes, but you see them, or at least you once did. And when the relationship breaks, those pictures collapse too. This is why grief can appear at strange times. A holiday arrives and you feel heavier than you expected. Not because you necessarily want the person back. Because this was supposed to be one of those holidays you spent together. You see an older couple holding hands in a store, and something inside you hurts. Not because their relationship is perfect, because they remind you of the future you once believed was waiting for you. You hear someone talk about an anniversary. You attend a wedding. A family member announces a pregnancy. You walk past the kind of house you once talked about living in. Suddenly the loss returns. These moments can confuse you because you thought you were getting better. You are getting better. Grief simply has many doors, and sometimes a future you never lived can still be something you genuinely grieve. That does not make you foolish. It means your hopes were real even if the future was not. There is an important distinction here. The relationship that existed and the relationship you expected are not always the same thing. The real relationship may have contained uncertainty, broken promises, distance, arguments, disappointment, but the future relationship in your mind was often different. In that future, things had settled down. They had grown. You had grown. The difficult years were behind you. You had finally become the couple, family, or partnership you always believed you could become. That imagined version can be incredibly hard to release because it never had the chance to disappoint you. The real person could fail you. The future version could remain perfect. That is why sometimes, even after you clearly see someone's limitations, part of you still says, "But what if? What if they had changed? What if we had made it through this? What if they had finally become ready? What if the next few years would have been different? What if we had reached the future I was waiting for?" Those questions can keep grief alive because they compare reality with possibility. And possibility almost always wins. Reality has flaws. Possibility does not have to. The future you pictured never had bad mornings. It never had another betrayal. It never had another broken promise. It existed in a place where everything somehow worked out. So when you compare what happened with what might have happened, The imagined future can look more beautiful than the real relationship ever was. This is where you need gentleness and honesty at the same time. Yes, grieve that future, but do not confuse grieving it with evidence that you should return to the person. You can mourn a dream without going back to the situation that could not safely hold that dream. That is a powerful distinction. You can say, "I wanted this to work," and also say, "It was not working." You can say, "I thought we would grow old together," and also say, "The way we were living was hurting me." You can say, "I miss what I believed we could become," and also admit, "That is not who we actually became." Both truths can exist. There may also be grief around security. When someone has been part of your life for years, they become connected to routine. You know when they wake up, what they eat, what makes them laugh, which television programs they like, how they take their coffee, what they say when they are tired. Even an imperfect relationship can create familiarity, and familiarity can feel like safety. When that disappears, ordinary life suddenly feels different. You may have to make decisions alone, attend events alone, sleep in a different room, change financial plans, restructure holidays, explain things to family, learn how to occupy hours that used to belong to someone else. And sometimes what you call missing them is partly missing the structure their presence gave your life. That matters because familiarity and compatibility are not the same. Something can feel familiar and still be unhealthy. Something can feel strange and still be better for you. The first months of peace can even feel lonely when you have spent years living around emotional chaos. The silence in the house may feel wrong. The empty chair may feel unbearable. No one is sending the message you used to expect. No one is walking through the door at the usual time. Your life feels unfamiliar, and the mind may interpret unfamiliarity as a mistake. Maybe I should go back. Not necessarily. Sometimes you're simply adjusting to a life that has not yet become familiar. New peace can feel uncomfortable before it feels peaceful. There may also be grief around identity. Perhaps you were a wife, a husband, a partner, the one who planned family gatherings, the one who took care of things, the one everyone thought would be with that person forever. When the relationship ends, you do not only ask, "Where did they go?" You may quietly ask, "Who am I now?" That question becomes especially powerful later in life. When decades have been built around certain roles, losing one can feel like losing part of your name. But roles are something you live. They are not everything you are. You existed before this person became part of your story. And there is still a version of you capable of existing beyond them. That version may feel unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean empty. Sometimes it means undiscovered. You may discover that the future did not disappear. Only one version of it did. That difference is enormous, because grief often tells you everything you were looking forward to is gone. But that is not completely true. Companionship may still exist in your future. Peace may still exist. Travel may still exist. Laughter may still exist. Meaningful holidays may still exist. Family connection may still exist. Love may still exist. It may simply arrive differently from the picture you once created. And perhaps one of the hardest parts of healing is allowing a new future to exist without constantly comparing it to the old one. The old picture was familiar. You had rehearsed it for years. The new one is blank, and blank space can feel frightening. But blank space is not the same as nothing. It is possibility. There may come a morning when you notice something small. You drink your coffee and do not immediately think about who should have been sitting across from you. You enjoy a holiday without measuring it against the holidays you expected. You make a plan without wondering whether they would have liked it. You laugh and do not feel guilty for being happy without them. That is when you begin to understand. You did not lose your only possible future. You lost one imagined future, and yes, that deserves grief. But it does not require the rest of your life. You can honor what you once hoped for without remaining loyal to a future that no longer exists. You can thank that dream for what it represented: love, security, companionship, belonging, growing old beside someone. Then you can ask a different question. How else might those things enter my life? Because sometimes the person leaves, but the needs beneath the dream remain, and those needs can be met in healthier ways. The future can change shape without losing its value. Your story can take another road without becoming a lesser story. And once you begin separating the person from everything you believed they represented, something even deeper starts to happen. You begin discovering that perhaps they were never the only source of the meaning, safety, love, or worth you attached to them in the first place. And once you begin grieving the future instead of chasing the person, another layer starts to come apart. Because sometimes what keeps someone emotionally powerful in your life is not only who they were, it is what they came to represent. Maybe they made you feel chosen. Maybe being with them made you feel attractive. Maybe they made you feel younger. Maybe they gave you a sense of belonging. Maybe their attention made you feel important. And when they left, betrayed you, or became distant, it felt like all of those things disappeared with them. That is where closure can become especially difficult, because now you are not only trying to release a person, you are trying to release the meaning you attach to them. And those meanings can become deeply tangled. You may say, "I miss them." But underneath that sentence may be something more specific. "I miss who I felt like when they wanted me." That is different. Maybe before them, you felt ordinary. Then they came into your life and looked at you in a way that made you feel special. They noticed you, they complimented you, they made you feel desirable. They made you feel like you still had something people wanted. So when the relationship ended, you did not only lose their attention, you lost a mirror. And suddenly, without that mirror, you began questioning what you saw in yourself. Am I still attractive? Will anyone else want me? Was that my last chance? Was I only valuable because they saw something in me? Those questions can keep a person emotionally attached long after love has faded, because now the person has become connected to self-worth. You are no longer just missing them. You are missing the version of yourself that existed around them. This is why reclaiming meaning matters. Your worth did not enter your life when they noticed you. They only reflected something that was already there. Their attention did not create your value. Their departure did not remove it. That sounds simple. Living it can take time, because the mind likes evidence. If someone admired you every day, their admiration became evidence. If they touched your hand, called you beautiful, wanted your company, or seemed proud to have you beside them, those experiences quietly reinforced a story. I matter. I am wanted. I am enough. Then when that person becomes cold, the story can reverse. If they no longer want me, maybe I am not enough. That is how another person's behavior becomes too powerful. They become the person who appears to decide your value. But no human being should have that job. Not a spouse, not a partner, not a parent, not an adult child, not a friend. Your worth is too important to hand over to another person's changing feelings. People can love you and still leave. People can desire you and later become distant. People can praise you and later criticize you. If every change in their behavior changes the way you see yourself, Your inner life becomes controlled by something you cannot control. That is exhausting. The same thing can happen with youth. Sometimes a relationship becomes connected to a younger version of yourself. Perhaps you met them when life felt more open. You had more energy. Your children were younger. Your career was growing. Your body felt different. You had plans everywhere. Years later, that person may become connected in your mind to that entire period of life. So when they disappear, it feels like youth disappears too. You are not only grieving them, you are grieving who you were when the relationship began. That can make letting go feel frightening, because it can feel like accepting that a whole era is over. You may keep photographs, old messages, small objects, songs, not because you desperately want the person back, because those things connect you to a time when you felt younger, more hopeful, more alive. There is nothing wrong with honoring that time, but your youth does not belong to them. Those years happened to you too. The laughter was yours. The strength was yours. The curiosity was yours. The dreams were yours. They may have been standing beside you, but they did not own that version of you. You can keep what was beautiful without keeping emotional dependence on the person who was present. That is a powerful separation. You begin saying, that time mattered because I was alive in it, not simply because they were there. Now the memory belongs to you again. The same thing can happen with belonging. Some people become our doorway into a family, a social circle, a community, a lifestyle. You become known as part of a pair. People invite both of you. You have routines, friends, holiday traditions, inside jokes, places where everyone expects to see you together. Then the relationship breaks. Suddenly it can feel as if you have not only lost a person, you have lost your place. That can be terrifying. Human beings need belonging. We want to know where we fit, who calls us, who expects us, where we go during important days. So sometimes people stay emotionally tied to someone because that person still represents membership in a world they miss. You may not actually want the relationship back. You may want your old place back. That is an important difference, because belonging can be rebuilt, slowly, in new ways, through family, through friendships, through community, through service, through people you have not even met yet. You do not have to remain attached to someone simply because they once gave you access to a sense of home. Home can change, and sometimes a new home feels more peaceful because you no longer have to earn your place in it. Safety can become tied to a person too. Maybe they handled finances, maybe they made important decisions, maybe they fixed things, maybe they drove long distances, maybe they were the person you called when something went wrong. Over time, their presence became associated with security. So after the relationship ends, even if the relationship itself was painful, you can feel exposed. Who will help me now? What if something happens? Can I manage this alone? That fear can make an unhealthy relationship look safer than it actually was, because practical dependence and emotional safety can become confused. Someone can make life easier in certain ways while making your inner life much harder. They can pay bills and still make you afraid. They can solve practical problems and still break trust. They can provide financial stability while creating emotional instability. This is why you have to separate the service someone provided from the meaning you gave their presence. Maybe what you need is security. That does not always mean you need them. Security can come through learning, planning, support systems, better financial understanding, trusted family, professional help, community, new routines. The more ways you learn to create safety, the less one person becomes the entire foundation beneath your feet. Success can become tangled in relationships too. Sometimes being chosen by a certain person makes you feel successful. Maybe they were admired, educated, wealthy, popular, respected. Maybe the relationship looked good from the outside. People complimented you. Your family approved. Your friends saw you as settled. So when the relationship breaks, embarrassment joins the grief. You are not only mourning privately, you feel as if something public has failed. What will people think? I thought I finally had everything together. I do not want to start over. This is where appearances can imprison you, because sometimes people stay attached to a broken relationship because losing it feels like losing status. But a relationship that looks successful and makes you miserable is not success. Peace is success. Respect is success. Being able to sleep without fear is success. Being able to speak honestly without punishment is success. Being yourself without constantly measuring another person's mood is success. When you redefine success, the person loses some of the power you gave them. And then there is desirability. This can become especially painful after betrayal. If someone chose another person, your mind may turn their choice into a competition. What did they have that I did not? Were they more attractive, younger, more exciting, more interesting? Now the betrayal becomes a judgment on your entire identity. But another person's choice is not an objective ranking of human value. People make choices for countless reasons. Some are impulsive, some are selfish, some are driven by novelty, some come from insecurity, some come from poor boundaries. Their decision does not become a scientific measurement of your worth. You do not become less beautiful because someone failed to value beauty properly. You do not become less lovable because someone did not know how to love responsibly. You do not become less desirable because one person chose differently. That is too much authority to give one human being. The deeper work is to ask yourself what the person represented. Not only, why do I miss them? But, what did I believe I had because they were there? Did you feel worthy? Then begin rebuilding worth from inside. Did you feel young? Then reconnect with what makes you feel alive now. Did you feel safe? Then build more than one source of safety. Did you feel like you belonged? Then create relationships where belonging does not depend on one person. Did you feel successful? Then define success in a way that does not require anyone else's presence. Did you feel desirable? Then remember that your body, your warmth, your humor, your experience, your mind, and your presence did not disappear when someone stopped appreciating them. This is how emotional dependence begins to loosen. Not by pretending the person meant nothing. They may have meant a great deal, but meaning can be reclaimed. What you experience through them does not have to remain trapped inside them. You can carry the confidence forward, the memories forward, the lessons forward, the parts of yourself that became stronger forward. You can leave the person behind without leaving yourself there too. And that may be what closure really starts to feel like. You stop saying, they took everything with them. You begin noticing what was yours all along. Your ability to love, your ability to connect, your capacity for joy, your sense of humor, your strength, your beauty, your wisdom, your ability to build a life. None of that belonged to them. They may have awakened certain parts of you. They may have reflected them. They may have shared them with you, but they did not own them. And once you understand that, their absence becomes less powerful. Because you are no longer waiting for them to return so you can feel whole again, you begin bringing the meaning home, back into your own life, back into your own hands, back into your own identity. And when that happens, the next truth becomes almost impossible to ignore. If someone treated you badly, perhaps the most painful mistake was never what they did. Perhaps it was allowing their treatment of you to become evidence about what you were worth. And once you begin separating the person from the meaning you gave them, one more illusion starts to weaken. The belief that the way they treated you somehow proves what you are worth. This belief can become deeply rooted. Someone betrays you, and part of you asks, "What was wrong with me?" Someone leaves, and you wonder, "Why was I not enough?" Someone becomes cold, and you think, "Maybe I was too difficult to love." Someone treats you carelessly, and slowly their behavior becomes a mirror. But it is a distorted mirror, because another person's choices are not an objective measurement of your value. They are a reflection of what that person was capable of giving. That difference matters. A person can betray someone loyal. They can abandon someone loving. They can lie to someone honest. They can neglect someone kind. They can take someone valuable for granted. Those things happen every day. Not because the loyal person had no value. Not because the loving person failed. Not because the honest person was foolish, but because human beings do not always treat people according to what those people deserve. Sometimes they treat people according to their own limitations, their fear, their selfishness, their immaturity, their desires, their lack of discipline, their need for control, their inability to appreciate what is in front of them. And if you turn their behavior into evidence about yourself, you can spend years carrying a conclusion that was never true. This is especially common after betrayal. Betrayal feels personal, very personal. Someone makes a choice that breaks trust, and the mind immediately begins comparing. What did the other person have that I did not? Were they more attractive? Were they more interesting? Did I become boring? Was I not loving enough? Now you are trying to explain someone else's lack of integrity by searching for a defect inside yourself. That is a painful mistake. Because betrayal is first a statement about the person who chose to betray. It tells you something about how they handled temptation, how they handled honesty, how they handled commitment, how they handled discomfort. And it may tell you something about the condition of the relationship too. But relationship problems and betrayal are still two separate things. A person can be unhappy and speak honestly. A person can feel disconnected and ask for change. A person can decide to leave. Betrayal is one possible choice among many, and the fact that someone chose it does not turn you into the cause of their character. The same is true with abandonment. Someone leaves when you needed them, maybe during illness, grief, financial trouble, a difficult season, a moment when you believed they would stay, and their absence cuts deeply because it seems to say, you were not worth staying for. But that may not be what their leaving says at all. It may say they did not know how to handle discomfort. It may say responsibility frightened them. It may say they were emotionally unavailable. It may say they wanted an easier life. It may say they did not have the strength, maturity, or commitment you believed they had. Their leaving gives you information about them. Do not automatically turn it into a verdict about you, because people sometimes abandon very valuable things. People throw away opportunities. They destroy healthy relationships. They neglect good friendships. They lose the trust of their children. They walk away from people who love them deeply. Human beings are capable of making terrible decisions. The fact that someone failed to recognize value does not mean the value was absent. Think of something precious placed into careless hands. Its worth does not change because the person holding it does not understand what they have. The same is true of you. Your value is not created by another person's ability to appreciate you. That becomes even harder to remember when someone is cruel. Cruel words can stay in the mind for years. You are too much. No one else will want you. You are difficult. You are useless. You will never find anyone better. Maybe those words were spoken during anger. Maybe they were repeated so often that they became familiar. And when a message becomes familiar, it can start sounding true even when it is not. That is one of the dangers of repeated criticism. Eventually you may begin speaking to yourself in the voice of the person who hurt you. They are gone, but the voice remains. You make a mistake and hear them. You look in the mirror and hear them. You consider trying something new and hear them. You enter another relationship and wonder whether they were right. This is how someone can leave your life and still occupy space inside your identity. And reclaiming that space takes intention. You have to begin asking, whose voice is this? Is this actually what I believe about myself? Or is this something I heard so often that I stopped questioning it? That question can be powerful, because not every thought in your head belongs to you. Some thoughts were planted there by parents, partners, friends, teachers, people who were angry, people who were insecure, people who needed you to feel smaller so they could feel larger. And part of healing is deciding what you no longer want to carry. Indifference can create the same wound in a quieter way. Sometimes nobody insults you, nobody shouts. They simply stop caring. They stop asking. Stop noticing. Stop making effort. You speak and they barely respond. You are hurting and they seem unaffected. That can make you feel invisible. And when someone becomes indifferent, the mind often says, if I mattered, they would care. But that is not always true. Sometimes you matter and the person simply does not know how to care properly. Sometimes they are emotionally shut down. Sometimes they have already detached. Sometimes they are self-absorbed. Sometimes they take people for granted. Sometimes they are incapable of giving the kind of attention you need. Again, their behavior gives you information. But be careful what conclusion you attach to that information. They did not value me is different from I had no value. They did not treat me with care is different from I was not worthy of care. They did not choose me well is different from I was not worth choosing. Those differences may look small on paper. Inside the heart, they are enormous. One interpretation destroys your self-worth. The other protects reality. This is where you must begin separating worth from treatment. Treatment is something someone does. Worth is something you carry. Treatment changes. Worth does not rise and fall every time another person changes their mind. Think about how dangerous life would become if your value truly depended on other people. You would be valuable when someone praised you, worthless when someone criticized you, beautiful when someone desired you, ugly when someone lost interest, important when someone called, invisible when they did not. Your entire identity would be controlled by other people's moods, and many people live that way without realizing it. They wake up waiting for evidence that they matter, a message, a compliment, attention, approval, and when that evidence disappears, panic begins. But a stable sense of worth has to come from somewhere deeper. It comes from knowing what kind of person you are, how you treat people, what you have survived, what you have learned, what you contribute, what you stand for. It comes from values instead of applause. That does not mean you never care what anyone thinks. We are human. Acceptance matters. Love matters. But there is a difference between enjoying love and requiring another person's love to prove that you deserve to exist with dignity. That is too heavy a responsibility to place in someone else's hands. And there is another reason this matters. If you believe mistreatment proves low worth, you may begin accepting more mistreatment. You think, maybe this is what I deserve, so your standards fall. You tolerate disrespect. You accept poor communication. You become grateful for small pieces of affection. You stop asking for what you need because you are afraid the other person will leave. And slowly, the way someone treated you becomes the way you start treating yourself. That is where the damage becomes deeper, because eventually the person who hurt you no longer has to reject you. You begin rejecting yourself. You stop speaking up. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop expecting kindness. You stop believing good things can happen to you. That is the part you must interrupt. Not tomorrow. Not when someone new arrives. Now. You begin by refusing to repeat their judgment. If they treated you as disposable, you do not treat yourself as disposable. If they ignored your needs, you do not continue ignoring them. If they broke your confidence, you begin rebuilding it. If they made you feel small, you begin taking up honest space again. This is how self-worth returns, not through one dramatic statement in the mirror. Through behavior, you prove your value to yourself by acting like your life matters. You protect your time. You protect your peace. You choose people more carefully. You stop begging for basic respect. You walk away from conversations designed to humiliate you. You become more loyal to your own dignity. And slowly, your mind learns a new message. I was treated badly, but that treatment was not the truth about me. That sentence can release years of shame, because shame asks, what is wrong with me? Wisdom asks, what was wrong with that situation? Shame makes the wound your identity. Wisdom makes the wound an experience. You are not what happened to you. You are the person who lived through it. The person who learned. The person who can choose differently now. And perhaps this is where the deepest freedom begins. When someone rejects you, you no longer collapse into the question, what does this say about me? You become curious about what it says about them, about the relationship, and about what you need next. That is emotional strength. Not becoming cold, not pretending rejection never hurts. It means refusing to let pain become proof of worthlessness. And when you stop using their treatment of you as evidence about your value, something else begins to change. You become less desperate for explanations, less desperate for validation, less desperate for them to come back and prove that you mattered, because you already know you mattered. And once that truth begins to settle inside you, you may discover that the endless search for an explanation was never only about understanding the past. Part of you was trying to make sure you could feel safe enough to trust the future again. And once you stop measuring your worth by the way someone treated you, another question begins to change shape. Why did they do this to me? At first, that question sounds like a search for understanding, but underneath it, there may be something more urgent, something your mind is trying to protect. What do I need to know so this never happens to me again? That is often the hidden question, because when someone you trusted hurts you, the world can suddenly feel less predictable. Before the betrayal, you thought you understood the relationship. You thought you knew the person. You thought certain things were safe. Then something happened that proved you could be wrong, and that does not only hurt your heart. It can shake your trust in your own judgment. You begin looking backward. How did I not see this? Were there signs? Did I ignore something? Could I have stopped it? Can I trust myself again? This is why the mind becomes so hungry for explanations. It believes that if it can understand exactly how the pain happened, it can build a perfect defense against ever feeling that way again. You start studying the past like someone examining the remains of a collapsed bridge. Where did the first crack appear? What warning did I miss? Which part failed? How could something that looked strong fall so quickly? That investigation can be useful for a while. There may be lessons there, but eventually you have to understand something important. You cannot make life completely safe by understanding every detail of what went wrong. There is no explanation powerful enough to guarantee that another person will never disappoint you. There is no list of signs that will make you immune to betrayal. There is no level of wisdom that allows you to see every human heart perfectly, and trying to reach that level can slowly turn wisdom into fear. You begin scanning everyone. A delayed reply feels suspicious. A change in someone's voice becomes evidence. A quiet evening feels dangerous. Someone asks for space, and your mind immediately thinks abandonment. Someone makes an ordinary mistake, and you start preparing for betrayal. This is what can happen when pain teaches you that surprise is dangerous. You stop trying to live. You start trying to predict. And prediction begins to feel like safety. But it is not real safety. It is vigilance. Those two can feel similar, but they create very different lives. Vigilance says, I must notice everything before it hurts me. Safety says, even if something hurts me, I trust myself to respond. That second kind of safety is much stronger, because you cannot control whether someone lies. You can control what you do when dishonesty becomes clear. You cannot guarantee that no one will betray you. You can decide that you will not repeatedly abandon yourself to keep someone who does. You cannot make every relationship permanent. You can learn not to destroy yourself when something ends. This is where healing moves away from explanation and toward self-trust. Maybe you will never fully know why they did what they did, but you can know what you will do differently now. That is something you can build. Start with boundaries. A boundary is not a wall around your entire heart. It is a door with a lock. The right people can enter, but they cannot enter however they want. That is an important difference. After betrayal, some people build walls. No one gets close again. I will never trust anybody. I do not need anyone. Those statements can feel strong because they remove risk, but they also remove connection. A boundary allows connection while protecting dignity. It says, you can be part of my life, but not at the cost of my peace. It says, I can love you without accepting everything from you. It says, if you repeatedly disrespect me, there will be distance. It says, my kindness does not cancel my limits. Boundaries create safety because they give you a response when something goes wrong. Before, perhaps you tolerated too much. You kept giving another chance. You kept believing promises. You kept thinking love meant patience without an ending. Now you begin deciding where your lines are. Not because you want to control another person, because you want to know what you will do. That distinction matters. A boundary does not say, you must never lie to me. You cannot control that. A boundary says, if I discover repeated dishonesty, I will change my level of access and trust. One tries to control them, the other guides you. That is power you can actually use. Then comes discernment. Discernment is different from suspicion. Suspicion looks for danger everywhere. Discernment pays attention without becoming afraid of everything. You notice patterns. You notice whether words and actions match. You notice how someone treats people when there is nothing to gain. You notice how they respond when they are wrong. You notice whether they can apologize without turning the apology into an excuse. You notice whether your boundaries are respected or constantly tested. You notice whether being around them leaves you peaceful or continually confused. This is not about judging someone after one bad day. Everyone has bad days. Everyone makes mistakes. Discernment looks for repetition. A single mistake can be human. A repeated pattern is information. Someone forgets to call once. Life happens. Someone disappears whenever responsibility appears. That is a pattern. Someone speaks harshly during one stressful moment. and later takes responsibility. That can be repaired. Someone humiliates you repeatedly and tells you that you are too sensitive. That is something else. The healthier you become, the less you need perfect people. What you need are people who can repair. People who can say, "I was wrong." People who listen. People who do not punish honesty. People who make mistakes but care about the effect of those mistakes. Safety is not created by finding someone who will never hurt you. That person does not exist. Safety grows when you choose people who know how to handle hurt responsibly. That is a much more realistic standard. Then comes perhaps the hardest part: learning to trust yourself again. After betrayal, you may become angry with yourself. I should have known. I saw that sign and ignored it. I cannot believe I trusted them. Be careful. There is a difference between learning from yourself and attacking yourself. Maybe you did ignore something. Then learn. Maybe you wanted to believe the best. Then understand why. Maybe loneliness affected your judgment. Maybe history made you stay longer. Maybe hope kept you invested. You can examine all of that without becoming cruel to yourself, because self-trust is not believing you will never make another mistake. Self-trust is knowing that when you recognize a mistake, you will respond. That is stronger. You do not need to become someone who sees every danger coming. You need to become someone who believes themselves when danger becomes clear. Maybe in the past you noticed something felt wrong and immediately talked yourself out of it. You are overthinking. They would never do that. Give them another chance. Do not ruin everything. Now you can learn to pause, not panic. Pause, ask questions, observe, gather information. Your instincts do not have to become a judge that declares someone guilty. They can become a signal saying, "Pay attention here." That is discernment. You do not ignore the feeling. You do not blindly obey it. You investigate calmly. This is how self-trust becomes balanced. There is another shift that happens when you begin feeling safe inside yourself. You stop needing guarantees from people. You no longer need someone to promise, "I will never leave you," because you know people cannot predict the future. Instead, you look for something more valuable. Consistency today, honesty today, respect today, responsibility today. You build trust from evidence rather than promises about forever. That can make relationships feel calmer, because you are no longer trying to secure the entire future in one conversation. You allow trust to grow slowly. Someone shows consistency. You notice they respect a boundary. You notice they make a mistake and repair it. You notice they tell the truth when lying would be easier. You notice. That is how trust becomes earned instead of imagined. And if one day that trust is broken, something inside you knows you will survive. That is the safety you were really searching for. Not a world where no one can hurt you. A self you will not abandon when someone does. There is enormous freedom in that, because suddenly the past does not need to reveal every secret. Maybe you never discover why they changed. Maybe you never know when the betrayal really started. Maybe you never learn what they were thinking. Those answers become less urgent because you have found something more useful. You know your standards now. You know what confusion feels like. You know what consistent respect looks like. You know which behaviors require attention. You know that you are allowed to leave situations that repeatedly damage your peace. You know you do not have to prove someone is a terrible person before deciding they are not healthy for you. And most importantly, you know that if life surprises you again, you will not face that surprise as the same person you once were. You have experience now. You have boundaries. You have discernment. You have a stronger relationship with yourself. That is how fear slowly becomes wisdom. Not by solving every unanswered question, by becoming someone who knows what to do even when answers never come. So the next time your mind asks, "Why did they do this?" listen more carefully. Maybe underneath that question, a frightened part of you is really asking, "Are we safe now?" And you can answer, not because you can promise that nobody will ever hurt you again, but because you can finally promise something you actually control. I will pay attention. I will believe patterns. I will protect my boundaries. I will not abandon myself to keep someone else. I will leave when staying repeatedly costs me my dignity. That is a different kind of closure. It is not knowledge about them, it is confidence in you. And as that confidence grows, something else becomes easier to recognize. You may discover that people have been giving you answers all along, not through one dramatic confession, but through the patterns they repeated again and again. And once you begin trusting yourself again, you stop needing one dramatic moment to tell you what was true. You start looking at something quieter, something harder to argue with, the pattern. Because people can say almost anything in one conversation. They can apologize, they can promise, they can explain, they can cry. They can tell you that everything will be different now, but patterns are harder to fake. A pattern is what happens again, and again, and again. That is why sometimes the clearest form of closure does not arrive through words at all. It arrives through repetition. Maybe they promised they would communicate better, but every difficult conversation ended with silence. Maybe they said they respected you, but they kept crossing the same boundary. Maybe they told you that you could trust them, but small lies kept appearing. Maybe they said you mattered, but you were always the one reaching out, repairing, forgiving, waiting, and trying. One moment can be confusing. A pattern is much clearer, and this is important because people often become trapped by exceptions. You remember the one beautiful weekend, the one sincere apology, the 1 month when everything seemed better, the one conversation where they opened up, the one time they showed up exactly when you needed them. Those moments were real, but one good moment does not automatically cancel a repeated pattern. A sunny afternoon does not change the climate, and sometimes you keep holding on because you confuse moments with evidence of permanent change. You say, "But I know they can be loving." Yes. The question is not whether they can be loving. The question is whether love is the pattern. You say, "They apologized before." Yes. The question is not whether they can apologize. The question is whether the behavior that required the apology actually changed. You say, "They were wonderful in the beginning." Maybe they were. But beginnings are not where character is tested. Time tests character. Pressure tests character. Disappointment tests character. Conflict tests character. Responsibility tests character. That is where patterns begin to speak. And if you want clarity, sometimes you have to stop listening only to what was said and start looking at what kept happening. That can feel uncomfortable because patterns may tell you something you have been trying not to know. Maybe the relationship was not confusing because you failed to understand it. Maybe it was confusing because their words and actions were constantly fighting each other. They said they cared, then acted indifferent. They said they wanted closeness, then disappeared. They said they hated hurting you, then repeated the same behavior. They said they valued honesty, then hid things whenever honesty became inconvenient. That gap between words and behavior creates emotional confusion. And when you live inside that gap long enough, you may start thinking the problem is your ability to understand. It may not be. The problem may be that you were receiving two different messages, one from their mouth, one from their life. When that happens, trust the message that required effort. Words are easy in emotional moments. Patterns cost something. Consistency requires discipline. Respect requires restraint. Honesty requires courage. Accountability requires humility. Those things are harder to perform over time. That is why behavior across months or years often tells you more than one final conversation ever could. Think about reliability. Someone can say, "You can always count on me." That sounds comforting. But what happens when life becomes inconvenient? Are they still there? Do they follow through? Do they remember what matters to you? Do they show up only when it benefits them? Reliability is not proven in sentences. It is proven in repetition. The same is true of respect. Someone can tell you, "I respect you." But do they speak about you with care when they are angry? Do they honor your boundaries? Do they listen when you say no? Do they embarrass you in front of others? Do they make important decisions that affect you without including you? Those behaviors answer the question. This does not mean you become harsh and unforgiving. Everyone has weak moments. People get tired. People make mistakes. People fail. A healthy pattern does not mean perfection. It means direction. When someone makes a mistake, what usually happens next? Do they repair it? Do they learn? Do they become more aware? Or does the same wound keep arriving in slightly different clothes? That difference matters. A mistake is an event. A pattern is a system. And if you are living inside a system that repeatedly hurts you, one apology may not be enough to change what the system is doing. That is where people sometimes lose years. They keep responding to each painful event as if it were separate. This time they were stressed. That time they were scared. This time they had too much to drink. That time work was difficult. This time they misunderstood. Every incident gets its own excuse, but when you step back, the individual excuses may form one clear picture. The details change. The result does not. You are still hurt, still confused, still waiting, still adjusting yourself, still hoping this time was the last time. That larger picture is the pattern. And sometimes closure begins when you finally stop judging each event alone. You start asking, what has this relationship been teaching me over time? That question is powerful because patterns are teachers. If someone repeatedly disappears when you need emotional support, the pattern may be teaching you that they are not dependable in difficult moments. If someone repeatedly mocks your feelings, the pattern may be teaching you that emotional safety is limited around them. If someone repeatedly promises change after consequences but returns to the same behavior when things calm down, the pattern may be teaching you that regret and transformation are not the same. This does not require you to read their mind. You do not need to know their deepest motive. You only need to notice what keeps happening. That is a much safer form of understanding. Because motives are invisible, behavior is observable. You can spend years asking whether someone intended to hurt you, but sometimes intention is not the most useful question. A better question may be, what happens to me when I stay close to this pattern? Do you become calmer or more anxious? Do you feel respected or constantly uncertain? Do you feel free to be yourself? Or do you spend your energy trying not to upset them? Do you become stronger in the relationship or smaller? Those answers matter. Because a pattern does not only reveal something about the other person, it reveals what the relationship is doing to you. That is important information. And once you start seeing patterns, another trap becomes easier to avoid. The promise of change. Promises can be beautiful, especially after pain. Someone looks you in the eye and says, "I finally understand. I will never do that again. You are everything to me." I have changed. And because you want peace, you want to believe them. Maybe they mean it in that moment. But change is not proven by intensity. It is proven by consistency. Real change often looks less dramatic than a promise. It looks like different choices 6 weeks later. Different behavior when nobody is watching. Different reactions during conflict. Different habits after the emotional conversation is over. Change survives ordinary days. That is where you should look. Not only at how sorry someone sounds, look at how differently they live. Because some people become very emotional when consequences arrive. They fear losing you. They fear being alone. They fear being exposed. They fear change. Those emotions may be real, but fear of consequences is not always the same as understanding the harm. This is why time matters. Time separates performance from transformation. Anyone can behave differently for a few days. A pattern needs longer to reveal itself, and that is one reason you do not have to rush. You do not have to decide that everything is repaired simply because someone gave a powerful apology. You can allow time to answer. That is not punishment. That is wisdom. Watch quietly. See whether consistency appears. See whether responsibility continues after the crisis passes. See whether they make different choices when they believe the relationship is safe again. Time will often tell you what words cannot. And there is another pattern worth watching, your own. How many times have you known something was wrong but talked yourself out of it? How many times did you notice the same behavior and say, maybe this time will be different? How many times did you accept an explanation because accepting reality felt more painful? This is not about blaming yourself. It is about learning your pattern too. Maybe your pattern was staying too long. Maybe it was trying to rescue people. Maybe it was falling in love with potential. Maybe it was believing apologies more quickly than behavior. Maybe it was confusing patience with endless tolerance. Seeing your own pattern gives you power, because now closure is not only about understanding them, it becomes an opportunity to understand yourself. You can say, this is what they repeatedly did, and then ask, why did I repeatedly stay? Not with shame, with curiosity. Maybe you were afraid of loneliness. Maybe you believed love meant never giving up. Maybe you had been taught to keep families together at any cost. Maybe you were waiting for the person you first met to return. Those truths can teach you something valuable, because once you recognize your own pattern, you can interrupt it. That is where growth becomes real. You stop needing their final explanation because you already have enough information to make a new decision. Their repeated behavior told you what they were willing to give. Your repeated pain told you what the relationship was costing you. Your repeated forgiveness told you where your boundaries needed strengthening. That can be enough. You may never get the sentence that explains everything perfectly, but perhaps you do not need one. Maybe the relationship already gave you hundreds of smaller answers, in missed calls, broken promises, repeated apologies, avoided conversations, moments of tenderness, followed by the same old harm. You were waiting for one final sentence while the pattern had been speaking for years. And once you begin listening to patterns, something changes. You become less hypnotized by one good day, less frightened by one bad day. You look at direction, consistency, repetition. You stop asking, what did they say this time? You start asking, what has their life been saying all along? That question can bring a kind of closure words rarely provide. Because now, you are no longer waiting for someone to explain their character to you. You are observing it. And sometimes that observation leads to one of the hardest truths of all. You may see the pattern clearly. You may understand what happened. You may know why you have to let go. And still discover that the other person will never see themselves the way you now see them. And once you begin trusting patterns more than promises, you may arrive at one of the most painful truths of all. You can see what happened clearly. You can understand the pattern. You can know what was done to you. And the other person may still never see it the same way. That can be harder to accept than the original hurt, because part of you still wants fairness. You want reality to be shared. You want the person who caused the pain to look back and say, yes, that is what happened. But some people do not live inside the same version of the story you do. They may remember themselves as the one who tried, the one who suffered, the one who was misunderstood, the one who had no choice. And in their version, you may become the difficult one, the cold one, the ungrateful one, the person who gave up. That can feel deeply unfair, especially when you know how much you tolerated before you finally stepped away. You remember the nights you tried to keep the peace, the conversations you started carefully, the chances you gave, the excuses you made, the parts of yourself you kept shrinking, and then somehow, after everything, they tell the story as if you were the problem. That is the kind of pain that can keep someone emotionally trapped for years, because now you are not only trying to heal from what happened, you are trying to correct the record inside someone else's mind. You think, if I could just explain it one more time, if I could show them exactly what they did, if I could remind them of the facts, if they could hear the story from my side without becoming defensive, maybe then they would finally understand. But some people do not misunderstand because you explained badly. They misunderstand because seeing the truth would cost them something. It might cost them their image of themselves, their pride, their innocence, their place as the victim. And people can protect those things very strongly. Most of us want to believe we are good people. We want to believe our choices made sense. We want to believe we did the best we could. So when reality threatens that image, the mind can become creative. It can soften details, change emphasis, forget certain moments, magnify your mistakes, minimize theirs. And little by little, the story becomes easier for them to live with. That does not mean every person is consciously lying. Sometimes people genuinely believe the version they tell. Memory is not a video recording. It is shaped by emotion, identity, fear, shame, and the stories we repeat. If someone tells themselves for years, I only acted that way because they pushed me, that explanation can become part of how they remember the relationship. And now you are trying to argue with a story that is protecting their identity. That can be exhausting, because facts alone do not always change a person who is emotionally invested in not seeing them. You can bring dates, messages, examples, witnesses. You can explain the same moment from 10 different angles, and they may still say, that is not how I remember it. At some point, you have to decide whether proving yourself is worth the cost. This is where freedom begins to look very different from fairness. Fairness says, they should understand. Freedom says, maybe they never will, and I can still move on. Fairness says, they should admit what they did. Freedom says, their refusal does not erase what I know. Fairness says, they should stop making me the villain. Freedom says, I cannot control the role I play in someone else's story. That last one is difficult, because being misunderstood hurts, especially by someone who once knew you closely. You may think, how can they say that about me after everything we shared? But closeness does not guarantee accurate understanding. Sometimes the people closest to us know our habits, our history, our routines, and still misunderstand our motives. And after a relationship breaks, people often simplify the story. It becomes easier to say, they changed, or they became selfish, or they abandoned me. Those sentences may leave out years of context, but simple stories are easier to carry than complicated truths. So they may choose the simple one, and you may be tempted to spend your life adding the missing details. But there is a question worth asking. Who are you trying to convince? Them? Their friends? Their family? Your children? People who heard only one side? And how much of your peace are you willing to spend doing it? Because the need to correct every false version can become another kind of prison. You start monitoring what they say. You wonder what mutual friends believe. You feel the urge to defend yourself whenever your name comes up. You rehearse explanations. You imagine conversations where everyone finally sees the truth. And without realizing it, they are still controlling your attention. Just in a different way. Before, you were waiting for their apology. Now you are waiting for their recognition. The shape changed, the dependence did not. This is why one of the deepest forms of closure is allowing someone to misunderstand you. Not everyone. Not in every situation. Sometimes false claims need to be corrected, especially when they affect your safety, family, work, or reputation in serious ways. But emotionally, you do not need universal agreement to know who you are. That is the shift. You stop trying to manage every mind you appear inside, because you cannot. Some people will believe the version that makes them comfortable. Some will believe the first story they heard. Some will choose sides without asking questions. Some will never know the full truth, and you may have to live anyway. That can feel frightening at first, but then something begins to loosen. You realize that your life does not become less true because someone tells it badly. You do not become cruel because someone calls your boundary cruelty. You do not become selfish because someone was angry that you stopped giving endlessly. You do not become heartless because you finally left something that was hurting you. People often describe your boundary according to what it costs them. If someone benefited from your lack of limits, your boundary may feel unfair to them. If someone depended on your silence, your honesty may feel aggressive. If someone was comfortable with you accepting poor treatment, your refusal may feel like rejection. Their discomfort does not automatically mean you are wrong. That is where self-knowledge becomes important. You have to know why you made the decision. Were you trying to punish them or protect yourself? Were you acting out of revenge or responding to a pattern? Did you leave after one small mistake or after repeated attempts to repair something that kept breaking? Ask yourself honestly. If there are parts you need to own them. That is strength. Maybe you said things you regret. Maybe you stayed silent too long and then exploded. Maybe you were not perfect. You do not have to become completely innocent to recognize that the relationship was unhealthy. Two truths can exist. You can have made mistakes and still have been mistreated. You can regret some of your behavior and still know leaving was necessary. You can apologize for your part without accepting responsibility for theirs. That kind of honesty makes you harder to manipulate, because you are not defending an image of yourself as flawless. You are simply trying to see clearly. And when you can admit your own mistakes, you become less dependent on someone else admitting theirs. You no longer need to win the moral contest. You can say, "This is where I was wrong," and then, "This is where they were wrong." No drama, no rewriting, just truth. But not everyone can do that. Some people need one person to be completely guilty and the other completely innocent. It makes the story simpler. And if that is how they survive emotionally, you may become the villain in their version. Let them have their version. That sentence may sound shocking, but think about what it gives you. You stop attending a trial that never ends. You stop presenting evidence to a judge who has already decided. You stop spending energy trying to control a story you do not own. You return to your own life. And something interesting happens when you do that. Over time, the people who truly know you often notice your pattern too. They see how you live, how you treat others, how you handle conflict, how you speak when the other person is not around. Character has a way of revealing itself over time. You do not always need a campaign. You do not always need to defend yourself loudly. Sometimes consistency speaks more clearly than explanation, and even if some people never see it, you can still be at peace. That is the part that matters, because closure is not getting everyone to agree with your side. Closure is reaching the point where disagreement no longer threatens your sense of reality. You know what happened. You know what you learned. You know what you would do differently, and you know why you chose to move forward. That is enough. Maybe one day the person will see themselves more clearly. Maybe age will soften them. Maybe consequences will teach them. Maybe someone else will say the same thing you once tried to say. Maybe they will finally understand. But you cannot build your healing around that possibility. Their self-awareness is their work. Your peace is yours. And there is freedom in finally separating the two. You stop waiting for them to become honest enough for you to heal. You stop waiting for them to tell the story correctly. You stop needing to be the hero in their version. You simply become responsible for being honest in your own. And when you can do that, another burden starts to fall away. Because if you no longer need to control what they believe about you, you may also discover that you do not need to keep correcting the story they tell about you to everyone else. And once you accept that someone may never see themselves clearly, another temptation begins to lose its power. The urge to make everyone else see your side. Because when a relationship breaks badly, the pain does not always stay between two people. It can spread into families, friend groups, workplaces, adult children, neighbors, communities. And suddenly, you are not only grieving what happened, you are managing a story. You hear that they told someone you were cold. You find out they said you changed. A mutual friend starts acting differently. A relative asks a strange question. Someone repeats a version of events that feels almost unrecognizable. And something inside you rises immediately. I need to explain. That urge can be powerful because being misunderstood feels like another kind of injury. You already lived through the pain. Now it feels like you are being asked to live through a false version of it too. So you start preparing your defense. You explain what really happened. You give dates. You describe conversations. You mention what they left out. You tell people what you tolerated. You try to put the missing pieces back into the story. And for a moment it can feel good. You think, at least now they know. But then another person hears something. Another relative asks. Another friend repeats a different version. And now you are explaining again. Soon, your healing becomes a public relations job. That is exhausting. Because you cannot personally correct every version of yourself that exists in another person's mind. And the more people involved, the more impossible that becomes. Every person hears stories through their own history, their own loyalties, their own fears, their own assumptions. Some people will believe you. Some will believe them. Some will believe parts of both. Some will decide before hearing anything. And some may never care enough to understand the full truth. That is uncomfortable. But it is also reality. Mature peace sometimes begins when you stop treating every misunderstanding like an emergency. Not every wrong opinion needs a response. Not every rumor deserves your energy. Not every person needs access to the full story. That can be especially difficult with mutual friends. You may think, but they have known me for years. How can they believe that? Because people often choose the version that allows them to avoid discomfort. If accepting your side would force them to question someone they love, they may resist it. If they have known the other person longer, Loyalty may shape what they hear. If they dislike conflict, they may reduce everything to, "You both made mistakes." That may feel unfair, but sometimes people are not equipped to hold complicated truth. They want a simple story. Two people fell out. Both were upset. Life goes on. And you may be sitting there thinking, "No, you do not understand what happened." Maybe they do not. The question is whether you need them to. That is where peace becomes practical. You begin asking, what would explaining this actually change? Would it protect something important? Would it correct a harmful lie that affects your work, safety, finances, or family? Would it help someone make a necessary decision? Or are you trying to change an opinion because being misunderstood feels unbearable? Those situations are different. There are times when you should speak. If a false story threatens your job, your legal position, your safety, or someone else's well-being, silence may not be wise. If children are being pulled into conflict, calm clarification may be necessary. If serious accusations are being made, facts may matter. Peace does not mean becoming passive, but many situations are not that serious. They are simply painful. A cousin believes you were the difficult one. An old friend thinks you should have stayed. A neighbor heard something inaccurate. A co-worker thinks the breakup was your fault. Those opinions may sting, but they may not deserve a piece of your life. That is where you have to learn the difference between correction and compulsion. Correction says, "This matters enough to address once." Compulsion says, "I cannot rest until everyone sees me correctly." That second one has no finish line, because even after you explain yourself, someone may still disagree. Then what? Do you explain harder? Do you send more messages? Do you produce more evidence? Do you find another person to confirm your version? At some point, defending yourself can start looking very similar to begging for validation. And that is not where you want to live. The challenge can become even deeper when adult children are involved. Maybe a marriage ended. Maybe there was betrayal. Maybe years of resentment finally broke something apart. And now the children are old enough to have opinions. That can hurt in a different way. You may want them to understand everything. You may want to tell them exactly what the other parent did. You may want them to know why you made certain decisions. That desire is understandable. But children, even adult children, can become emotionally trapped when they are forced to carry the entire history of their parents' pain. They may feel pressure to choose, to judge, to become the referee. And sometimes protecting your peace means resisting the urge to recruit them into your side of the story. You can be honest without turning them into a courtroom. You can say, "There were things in the relationship that became unhealthy for me." You can explain what affects them directly, but you do not always need to hand them every wound and ask them to decide who was right. That restraint can be very hard, especially if you believe the other person is already telling their version freely. You may think, if I stay quiet, they will believe them. Maybe. But your relationship with your children is not built only on one story. It is built over time. They have watched you. They have experienced you. They know how you behave. And as they grow, they may understand more without you forcing the understanding. Time reveals things. Patterns reveal things. Character reveals things. You do not always have to drag the truth into the room. Sometimes it arrives on its own. The same applies to relatives. Families can be difficult because people carry old roles. You may still be the sensitive one, the stubborn one, the difficult one, the one who always leaves. Those labels can survive for decades. So when conflict happens, people may simply fit it into the role they already gave you. You can spend years fighting that label, or you can stop living for the family version of you. That is freedom. You are allowed to outgrow an old role, even if nobody updates their description. You are allowed to become calmer while someone still calls you dramatic. You are allowed to develop boundaries while someone still calls you selfish. You are allowed to stop rescuing people while someone still says you changed. Maybe you did change. Sometimes change is exactly what healing looks like. And there is something else to remember. The person who tells a distorted story about you may need that story. That does not make the story true. It simply means the story serves a purpose for them. Maybe it protects their pride. Maybe it helps them avoid guilt. Maybe it allows them to explain why you left without examining their behavior. Maybe it gets them sympathy. You cannot take away their need for that story by arguing with them. If the story is protecting something deep inside them, facts may bounce off it. So stop trying to live inside their narrative. Come back to your own. Ask yourself something simple. Am I living in a way that I respect? That question matters more. Do you tell the truth? Do you take responsibility when you are wrong? Do you treat people fairly? Do you apologize when needed? Do you protect yourself without becoming cruel? Do you keep growing? If the answer is yes, then let your life speak. You do not need to spend all your energy managing impressions. There is a quiet dignity in refusing to perform your innocence for everyone. You know what happened? The people who truly matter may know enough, and the people who have already chosen a story may not be reachable anyway. That does not mean criticism never hurts. It will. You may still feel something when an old friend pulls away. You may still feel anger when you hear what was said. You may still want to send the message. But now you can pause. Ask, will this bring clarity, or will it pull me back into the same emotional fight? That pause can save you, because every defense keeps you connected to the accusation. Every explanation keeps you inside the old story a little longer. Sometimes the strongest response is not another argument. It is a life that moves forward. You work, you laugh. You build new relationships. You protect your peace. You become more honest with yourself. You sleep better. You stop checking who believes what. And eventually, something changes. The need to be understood by everyone becomes smaller. You realize that people who truly know your character do not need a 30-minute defense. And people committed to misunderstanding, you may not change after 3 hours. That knowledge saves energy. It also protects your future relationships. Because if you spend too much time defending yourself to the old circle, you may have no emotional energy left for the new life trying to open in front of you. You cannot build forward while constantly turning around to correct the past. At some point you have to choose direction. You can keep facing backward, explaining. Or you can face forward, living. And living becomes its own answer. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. The person who said you could not survive without them watches you rebuild. The person who called you unstable sees your calm. The person who claimed you were impossible to love sees you surrounded by healthier relationships. You do not need to prove anything through performance. Time has a way of separating stories from character. And even if some people never change their minds, you can still be free. Because freedom is not controlling what everyone thinks about you. Freedom is no longer arranging your life around their opinion. That is mature peace, not being correctly understood by every person, but being deeply understood by yourself. And once you reach that place, forgiveness begins to look different too, because you may discover that releasing bitterness does not mean reopening the door to the person who hurt you. And once you stop trying to control the story other people tell about you, another question begins to rise. What does forgiveness actually require? For many people, this is where healing becomes confusing. Because somewhere along the way they were taught that forgiving someone means letting them back in. answering the phone again, opening the door again, trusting again, returning to the relationship, pretending that what happened is finally behind both of you. But forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can release bitterness without returning to the place where the bitterness began. That distinction can save your peace. Because sometimes the person who hurt you returns after months or years with familiar words. I miss you. I have been thinking about everything. Life is too short. We should put the past behind us. And because you have worked hard to let go of anger, you may begin wondering whether refusing them access means you have not truly forgiven them. It does not. You can forgive someone and still remember what their presence taught you. You can forgive someone and still understand that trust was damaged. You can forgive someone and still decide that the relationship is no longer safe enough to continue. Forgiveness is something that can happen inside you. Reconciliation requires something from both people. Those are two very different processes. Forgiveness may mean that you stop wishing for revenge. You stop hoping life punishes them. You stop carrying the argument everywhere you go. Their name no longer ruins your afternoon. Their happiness no longer feels like an insult. Their failures no longer bring you secret satisfaction. You slowly become less interested in what happens to them. That is release. Reconciliation is different. Reconciliation asks whether two people can safely build something again. That requires honesty, accountability, changed behavior, respect, consistency, time. And sometimes, even when all of those things appear, you may still decide not to return. That choice is yours. Because forgiveness does not create a debt. You do not owe someone renewed access simply because you stopped being angry with them. Think about what happens when someone breaks something valuable in your home. You may forgive them. You may believe they are sorry. You may no longer feel angry. But if they have repeatedly broken valuable things every time they visit, forgiveness does not require you to hand them the keys. That is not hatred. That is learning. And yet many people struggle with this because they were raised to believe that a good person always gives another chance. Maybe you heard things like, be the bigger person. Life is too short to hold grudges. Family is family. Everyone makes mistakes. Those sentences can contain wisdom, but they can also be used to pressure people back into harmful situations. Yes, everyone makes mistakes, but not every mistake is the same. And more importantly, not every person responds to mistakes the same way. Some people hurt you once, recognize it, take responsibility, and change. Others hurt you, apologize, return, and repeat the same thing. Then they call your memory of the pattern a grudge. There is a difference between holding a grudge and remembering evidence. A grudge says, I want you to suffer forever because of what you did. A boundary says, I learned what happens when I give you this level of access. Those are not the same. One is about punishment, the other is about protection. You can wish someone well from a distance. You can genuinely hope they become healthier. You can hope they find peace. You can hope they learn from what happened. And you can still decide that you do not need to be present for that journey. That is especially important when the person tells you they have changed. Maybe they have. People do change, sometimes deeply, but their growth does not automatically require your return. That can be difficult to accept because you may think, if they are truly different now, shouldn't I give them another chance? Not necessarily. Their change belongs to them. Your decision belongs to you. Maybe the relationship left scars you do not want to reopen. Maybe too much trust was destroyed. Maybe your life has moved in another direction. Maybe you simply feel peaceful without them. You are allowed to honor that peace. Someone becoming healthier does not give them ownership of your future. And there is something deeply freeing about understanding this, because otherwise you remain emotionally connected to their development. You keep checking. Have they changed yet? Are they more mature now? Do they finally understand? Would things be different today? But once you understand that forgiveness does not depend on reunion, their growth stops becoming your responsibility. They can change or not change. You can still move forward. That is freedom. There are also relationships where reopening the door looks harmless at first. One message, one coffee, one family gathering, one friendly conversation. And perhaps that is all it remains. But sometimes the old dynamic slowly returns. The familiar guilt, the pressure, the expectations, the small disrespect, the feeling that you have to manage their mood again. This is why you should pay attention to what happens inside you when contact resumes. Not only what they say, what happens to you. Do you feel calm? Or do you immediately become tense? Do you feel free to speak? Or do you start choosing every word carefully? Do you feel respected? Or do old roles quickly return? Your body can sometimes notice a familiar dynamic before your mind is willing to admit it. That does not mean every uncomfortable feeling proves danger, but it deserves attention. Healing teaches you to notice yourself. For years, perhaps all your attention went toward them. How are they feeling? Are they angry? Are they upset? What do they need? What will keep the peace? Now you begin asking different questions. How do I feel when I am around this person? What happens to my peace? Do I like who I become in this relationship? Can I be honest here? Can I say no without fear? Can I disagree without being punished? Those questions tell you whether access is healthy, because not everyone deserves the same level of access to you. That may sound harsh until you realize you already live this way naturally. A stranger does not have the same access as a close friend. A co-worker does not know everything your family knows. Someone you met yesterday does not hold the same trust as someone who has shown loyalty for 20 years. Access has levels, and when someone damages trust, it is reasonable for their level of access to change. They may move from close friend to occasional acquaintance, from daily contact to limited contact, from private conversations to public settings, from knowing everything about your life to knowing very little. And sometimes they may move completely outside your life. Forgiveness does not require restoring their old position. Positions are earned through trust. And trust is not rebuilt simply because someone requests it. Trust is rebuilt through evidence. Slowly, a person cannot demand, "If you forgave me, you would trust me." No. Forgiveness may be offered. Trust has to grow. Trust asks, what has changed? Not only, what did you say? It watches how someone behaves when they are disappointed, whether they respect a no, whether they become defensive when the past is mentioned, whether they pressure you to move faster than you are ready to move, whether they accept the consequences of what happened. That last one matters. Someone who has genuinely changed often understands that change does not erase consequences. They may say, "I understand why you do not trust me yet. I understand why you need distance. I understand that I may never have the same place in your life." That response tells you something, but someone who says, "I apologized. What else do you want?" may still be focused more on escaping consequences than repairing harm. You are allowed to notice that. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to say no. And you do not need anger to say it. That is one of the clearest signs of healing. In the beginning, your boundary may need anger. Anger can help you leave. It can give you strength when you have spent years accepting too much. But eventually, the boundary can remain even after the anger disappears. You no longer need to say, "Stay away because I hate you." You can say, "I wish you well," But this relationship is not healthy for me. That is very different. There is no war inside it, no punishment, no need to destroy them, only clarity. Sometimes people will not understand that clarity. They may accuse you of being unforgiving. They may say you are living in the past. They may tell relatives, "I already apologized," but they refuse to move on. Let them misunderstand. You do not need to prove your forgiveness by becoming available again. Moving on does not always mean moving back towards someone. Sometimes moving on means moving farther away, without bitterness. There is a quiet beauty in that. You can remember what happened without feeling the need to reopen it. You can hear their name without your body filling with anger. You can hope they are doing well without wanting to know the details. You can remember good moments without using those memories as a reason to return. You can acknowledge that someone mattered deeply and still accept that their season in your life is over. That is not failure. Some relationships are not meant to be restored. Some are meant to teach. Some reveal where your boundaries were weak. Some reveal wounds you need to heal. Some show you what you never want to experience again. Some prepare you to recognize healthier love later. The relationship may have ended. The lesson does not have to be wasted. And perhaps that is one of the most mature forms of forgiveness. You take the lesson without carrying the poison. You keep the wisdom without keeping the resentment. You remember enough to protect yourself without remembering in a way that destroys your peace. You do not need them to suffer. You simply no longer volunteer to suffer with them. That is a very different life. Because bitterness keeps someone inside you even after they have left. You wake up thinking about them. You replay the injustice. You hope they regret losing you. You wait for life to teach them a lesson. They may be miles away, yet they still occupy a room inside your mind. Forgiveness begins clearing that room, not so they can move back in, so you can use the space for something better. Your present, your family, your friendships, your health, your joy, your future. Things that deserve the energy you were spending on resentment, and eventually you may reach a place where the question is no longer, have I forgiven them enough to let them return? The question becomes, what kind of life protects the peace I have worked so hard to rebuild? That is a wiser question, because forgiveness is about what you release. Access is about what you allow. Trust is about what has been earned. Reconciliation is about what two people can safely rebuild. Do not force those four things to mean the same thing. They do not. You can release the anger, keep the door closed, wish them peace, and choose your own. There is no contradiction in that. There is maturity. And once you understand that forgiveness does not require reopening the door, boundaries stop feeling like punishment. They begin to reveal themselves for what they can truly be. A form of closure you create with your own hands. And once you understand that forgiveness does not require reopening the door, something else becomes clear. Sometimes peace does not come from hearing better words. Sometimes it comes from changing access. Because an apology can sound beautiful and still leave your life exactly the same. A boundary changes the structure. That is why boundaries can bring a kind of closure that words often cannot. An apology says, I am sorry. A boundary says, this is what will happen now. That difference matters. Maybe someone keeps calling at times that leave you anxious. You see their name on the screen and your body tightens before you even answer. Maybe every conversation pulls you back into old arguments. Maybe they ask personal questions they no longer have the right to ask. Maybe they speak to you in a tone you have worked hard to stop accepting. In that situation, closure may not be another conversation about why they should change. Closure may be changing how much access they have to you. Maybe you stop answering every call. Maybe you return messages when you are ready. Maybe you decide that some conversations will happen only by text. Maybe you silence notifications at night. Maybe you block a number completely. That can feel harsh at first, especially if you were taught that being kind means always being available. But availability is not the same as kindness. You can care about someone and still decide that constant access to you is unhealthy. Your phone is a door. Not everyone needs a key. That may sound simple, but it can change your daily life. Because repeated access keeps repeated emotion alive. Every call can reopen the argument. Every message can restart hope. Every notification can pull your attention back into a relationship you are trying to leave emotionally. So sometimes the most healing action is not finding the perfect response. It is removing the constant invitation to respond. Silence on your phone can create silence in your mind, not immediately, but over time. And that is tangible peace. Then there are conversation limits. Some people know exactly how to pull you into an old pattern. You begin discussing one small issue. Suddenly you are defending your entire life. You are explaining decisions from 5 years ago. You are apologizing for things that have nothing to do with the original subject. You leave the conversation exhausted. That is information. You may need a boundary around what you are willing to discuss. Maybe you say, I am not discussing that anymore. Maybe you keep conversation short. Maybe you refuse to argue late at night. Maybe you leave when shouting begins. Maybe you stop explaining the same decision for the 10th time. That is not avoidance when the conversation has already shown that it goes nowhere. Sometimes refusing to repeat the argument is the healthiest way to end it. People who benefited from unlimited access to your attention may not like this. They may say you have changed. They may call you cold. They may accuse you of running away. But there is a difference between running away from every difficult conversation and refusing to live inside the same destructive one forever. You are allowed to recognize when enough has been said. You are allowed to decide that not every accusation deserves a defense. You are allowed to end a conversation before it becomes another wound. That is a boundary. And boundaries become even more important when money is involved. Financial ties can keep people emotionally connected long after a relationship has ended. Shared accounts, loans, bills, property, subscriptions, debts, informal promises, money that keeps moving back and forth. These arrangements can create constant reasons for contact, and constant contact can make emotional separation much harder. Sometimes closure requires making financial arrangements clearer, separating accounts where appropriate, writing agreements down, stopping informal lending, deciding who pays for what, using neutral third parties when necessary, keeping records instead of depending on memory. This may not sound emotional, but practical clarity can reduce emotional chaos. When money is vague, relationships often stay vague too. One person says, I thought you were paying that. Another says, you still owe me. Then the old conflict returns through a new door. Clear financial boundaries can close that door. They can also protect you from being pulled back into guilt. Maybe someone always asks you for help. You know their struggles. You feel sorry for them. So even after the relationship changes, you keep rescuing them financially. And every rescue keeps a connection alive. Ask yourself something honest. Am I helping because I truly want to, or because I feel responsible for their life? That question matters. You can be generous without becoming financially trapped. You can help once without creating a permanent obligation. You can decide that certain support is no longer yours to provide. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. Family involvement can become another complicated area. Maybe relatives carry messages between you. Your brother said, your daughter thinks, your aunt wants you two to make peace. Now, the relationship is no longer between two people. It has become a family network that can keep conflict alive for years. A boundary may mean telling family members calmly, "Please do not carry messages between us," or "I do not want updates about their private life," or "I am not discussing the details of what happened." That can protect everyone, because family members sometimes become messengers without realizing how much stress they create. They think they are helping, but every update reopens the door. They asked about you. They looked sad. They said they regret everything. Suddenly your mind is back inside the relationship again. You begin wondering whether to call, whether they changed, whether you should respond, and the emotional distance you were building disappears. So sometimes peace requires less information. That can be surprising. We often think knowledge gives control, but when the relationship is over, constant information about someone can keep them psychologically present. What they are doing, who they are seeing, where they went, whether they are happy, whether they miss you. None of that may help you heal. Sometimes not knowing becomes a boundary, and not knowing can become peaceful. There is also emotional availability. This may be the hardest boundary of all, because someone may no longer have practical access to your life, but still have enormous emotional access. They call when they are lonely. You comfort them. They have a bad day. You listen. They need advice. You help. They feel afraid. You reassure them. And slowly, you are still performing the emotional role you had before, even though the relationship supposedly ended. This can create deep confusion. You are not together, but you are still their emotional home. They do not have to commit to you. They do not have to repair the relationship. But they still receive your care, your listening, your attention, your comfort. That arrangement can keep you emotionally stuck, because part of you continues giving the intimacy of a relationship without receiving the security of one. Sometimes closure requires saying, "I cannot be the person you come to for this anymore." That sentence can feel painful, especially when you still care. But caring does not automatically make you responsible. You can hope someone finds support without volunteering to be the support that keeps you attached. That is a powerful boundary, because emotional availability is valuable. It should not be given automatically to someone simply because they once had it. When trust changes, access may need to change too. The same is true with family gatherings. Maybe you cannot completely avoid the person. They may be part of your family. You may share children, grandchildren, friends, community events. In those cases, closure may not mean no contact. It may mean structured contact. You decide what subjects are safe. You decide how long you stay. You decide whether private conversations happen. You decide whether you leave if disrespect begins. This allows you to protect your peace without demanding that everyone rearrange their life around the conflict. That can be especially useful when adult children or grandchildren are involved. You do not have to turn every family event into a battlefield. You can be civil without becoming close. You can be polite without reopening intimacy. You can share a room without sharing your inner life. That is emotional maturity. People often think boundaries have to be dramatic. They picture a final speech, a slammed door, a complete disappearance. Sometimes that is necessary, but many boundaries are quiet. You simply stop doing certain things. You stop explaining, stop lending money, stop answering late-night calls, stop discussing your private life, stop allowing relatives to carry messages, stop meeting alone, stop responding immediately. No announcement, no performance, just a new pattern. That is often where the peace comes from, because your nervous system begins learning that the old situation no longer has unlimited access to you. The phone does not control your evening. The argument does not control your weekend. The family gossip does not control your mood. The financial tie does not control your decisions. Little by little, your life becomes yours again. That is why a boundary can sometimes feel more healing than an apology. An apology may change how you understand the past. A boundary changes how you experience the present, and you live in the present. That is where your peace has to exist. There is something else boundaries teach you. They teach you that closure can be active. You do not have to wait for a feeling. You do not have to wake up one morning and suddenly feel completely finished. Sometimes you create the conditions that allow the feeling to arrive later. You reduce contact. Your mind becomes quieter. You limit arguments. Your body relaxes. You stop checking for messages. Your attention returns to your own life. Then one day you notice that you have gone several hours without thinking about them. Then a whole afternoon. Then a day. Not because you forced yourself to forget, because the relationship no longer has constant access to your nervous system. That is healing through structure. And structure can be powerful, especially when emotions are still messy. You may still miss the person. You may still feel angry. You may still wonder whether you made the right decision. A boundary does not require emotional certainty. It only requires enough clarity to know what protects you right now. That can be enough. You do not have to know what you will want 5 years from now. You can decide what is healthy today. Maybe someday contact changes. Maybe it does not. You do not have to solve the entire future. You only have to stop giving the present away. And if someone truly respects you, they will understand that boundaries are not invitations to negotiate forever. They may not like them, but they can respect them. A person who constantly pushes your boundary is giving you more information. They call from different numbers after being blocked. They use relatives to reach you. They create emergencies that are not emergencies. They insist you owe them a conversation. They demand access because of history. That behavior matters, because a boundary is not proven by what you say. It is proven by what you do when someone tests it. That is where many people struggle. They set a limit. The other person becomes upset. Then guilt appears, so the limit disappears. Now the other person learns something. If they push hard enough, your boundary will move. This is why consistency matters. You do not need to become cruel. You need to become steady. A calm no repeated consistently is often stronger than a long, angry speech. And every time you keep a healthy boundary, you teach yourself something important. My peace is worth protecting. That message can repair parts of you that were damaged by years of overgiving, because maybe the deepest wound was not only that someone crossed your limits. Maybe it was that you stopped believing you had the right to have limits at all. Now you are learning again. You have a right to privacy, a right to rest, a right to decide who speaks to you, a right to choose what conversations you enter, a right to control your money, a right to protect your emotional energy, a right to leave a room, a right not to answer. These are simple things. But after a painful relationship, simple things can feel revolutionary. And slowly, closure begins to take a new form. It is not a sentence they say. It is the quiet evening you finally keep for yourself. It is the phone that no longer makes your stomach tighten. It is the family gathering where you stay calm because you know your limits. It is the bank account that no longer ties you to old conflict. It is the conversation you end before it becomes cruel. It is the emotional energy you stop giving away. That is closure you can feel. Closure you can live inside. Closure built not from their apology, but from your choices. And once your life becomes safer on the outside, another layer of healing can finally begin. Because sometimes the relationship has ended, the boundaries are in place, and yet your body is still acting as if the danger has not completely passed. And once the boundaries are in place, you may expect your whole body to understand that the danger is over. But the body can be slower than the mind. You can know the relationship ended. You can know the person no longer has the same access to you. You can know you are safer now. And still feel your shoulders tighten when the phone rings. Still wake in the middle of the night. Still feel your stomach drop when you hear a familiar name. Still become tense when someone takes too long to reply. That does not always mean you want the person back. Sometimes it means your body has not yet learned what your mind already knows. The danger has passed, but part of you is still standing guard. This can happen after betrayal, because betrayal is not only an idea, it is an experience. There may have been moments when you did not know what was true, moments when you waited for a message, moments when you noticed something felt wrong, moments when you were told not to worry, only to discover later that your worry had a reason. Over time, the body can begin to expect another shock. That expectation can show up physically. Your jaw stays tight, your breathing becomes shallow, your chest feels heavy, your stomach becomes unsettled. You find it hard to fall asleep because your mind becomes more active the moment the room gets quiet. You may check your phone even when there is nothing there. You may feel tired all day and strangely alert at night. Your body is trying to protect you. The problem is that protection can continue long after the original situation has ended. Think of a smoke alarm that once detected a real fire. The alarm did its job, but now it has become so sensitive that even burnt toast makes it scream. The alarm is not evil. It is not broken beyond repair. It has simply learned to react quickly. Something similar can happen inside you after emotional pain. A small change in someone's tone can feel bigger than it is. A delayed message can make your heart race. Someone being quiet can feel like rejection is coming. A disagreement can make you feel as if the whole relationship is about to collapse, and your mind may immediately start building explanations. What did I do? Are they leaving? Is something wrong? That reaction can feel automatic, because in some ways it is. Your body remembers patterns. It remembers what came before the pain. Maybe there was silence before betrayal. Now silence feels dangerous. Maybe someone became distant before leaving. Now distance makes you alert. Maybe you discovered lies after noticing tiny changes in behavior. Now you notice every tiny change. This is why healing cannot happen only through thinking. You can understand the entire story intellectually and still feel physically unsafe. You can explain exactly what happened. You can understand why the relationship ended. You can know the person was not right for you and still lie awake at 2 o'clock in the morning with your heart beating faster than it should. Knowledge matters, but the body often needs experience. Repeated experiences of safety. Quiet mornings where nothing bad happens. Evenings where you do not have to watch someone's mood. Conversations where disagreement does not become punishment. Relationships where people do what they say. Moments where you say no and nobody attacks you for it. These experiences slowly teach the body a new pattern. This is different. That learning takes time. And one of the worst things you can do is become angry with yourself because it is taking time. You may say, I should be over this. But the body does not heal according to pride. It learns through repetition. If you spent years feeling uncertain, a few peaceful weeks may not immediately erase that conditioning. You have to give calm a chance to become familiar. That is where simple routines can help. Not dramatic routines, small ones. You wake up and give yourself a few quiet minutes before reaching for your phone. You breathe more slowly, you stretch, You take a short walk. You sit outside. You drink something warm without checking messages. You allow your nervous system to experience ordinary life without constantly searching for danger. These moments may look small, but they send a message. Nothing is chasing me. I do not have to solve anything right now. I am here. I am safe in this moment. That is different from trying to force yourself to feel calm. Sometimes people turn relaxation into another job. I must stop thinking. I need to calm down. Why am I still anxious? Now you are fighting the tension, and the fight creates more tension. A gentler approach is to notice. My shoulders are tight. My stomach feels unsettled. My breathing is fast. You do not have to judge it. You simply notice. Then you give the body something different. A slower breath, a glass of water, a walk, a quieter room, a conversation with someone safe. You are not trying to erase what happened. You are teaching yourself what is happening now. That distinction matters. The body can also carry pain through sleep. Night can become difficult because there are fewer distractions. During the day, you have tasks, people, noise, responsibilities. At night, the mind has room. Old conversations return. Questions appear. The body becomes alert just when you want it to rest. This can create a frustrating cycle. You sleep poorly. Then you become more emotionally sensitive the next day. Small things feel bigger. You become tired. Your patience becomes shorter. Then nighttime comes again, and your body still struggles to settle. This is why emotional healing and physical care are connected. Rest matters, food matters, movement matters, routine matters. Reducing unnecessary stimulation matters. You do not have to become perfect at any of these things, but a body under emotional strain needs basic care. Sometimes healing looks less like a breakthrough and more like going to bed at a reasonable hour, eating something nourishing, taking a walk instead of reading old messages, turning off the phone instead of waiting for someone to contact you. Those choices may not feel dramatic, but they move you towards stability. Then there are emotional spikes. You can be doing well for weeks. Then suddenly, a song plays. A place reminds you of them. Someone mentions their name. An anniversary appears on the calendar, and the emotion hits hard. You may feel angry, sad, shaky, confused. The first thought may be, I am back at the beginning. No, you are having a reaction. That is not the same as losing all your progress. Healing is not a straight road. Memory can activate emotion long after you have made peace with the decision. The important question is not, did I feel something? The important question is, what did I do with the feeling? Maybe before, one painful memory would lead to 3 hours of checking messages. Now it leads to 10 quiet minutes and a walk. That is progress. Maybe before, hearing their name ruined your entire day. Now it hurts for a moment and then passes. That is progress. Maybe before, you would contact them immediately. Now you notice the urge and let it go. That is progress. Do not measure healing by whether you never feel pain again. Measure it by how much control the pain still has over what you do. That changes everything. There is also something important about safety in new relationships. If someone new enters your life, your old fear may come with you. They may be honest, consistent, kind, but part of you keeps waiting for the hidden problem. You look for cracks. You question good moments. You wonder when everything will change. This is where you need patience with yourself and fairness toward the new person. The goal is not blind trust. The goal is not constant suspicion either. The goal is to let the present person prove who they are through present behavior. Do not force them to answer for someone else's choices. But do not ignore your needs just to prove you are healed. You can communicate. You can say, "Consistency matters to me." You can say, "If plans change, please tell me." You can say, "Honesty is important even when the truth is uncomfortable." Healthy people do not require you to pretend you have no history. But healthy healing also means not making someone endlessly prove they are not the person who hurt you. There has to be space for new evidence. That is how your body begins learning that not every relationship ends the same way. The same is true when you are alone. Sometimes, after a painful relationship, solitude feels unsafe at first. The quiet can feel too large. You may fill every moment with television, music, calls, scrolling, or activity, because stillness brings old feelings closer. But over time, solitude can become one of the places where your body learns safety again. You sit in your own room. Nothing is being demanded. Nobody's mood needs managing. Nobody is lying beside you, making you question what is true. You can breathe. You can choose what happens next. At first, the quiet may feel empty. Then it starts to feel peaceful, and eventually, something beautiful happens. Your body stops treating peace like the silence before something bad happens. It begins recognizing peace as peace. That is a major shift. Because when you have lived around unpredictability, calm can feel suspicious. You are waiting for the next argument, the next message, the next disappointment. But day after day, nothing arrives. Your nervous system slowly lowers its guard. Your shoulders soften. Sleep becomes easier. Your stomach stops reacting to every thought. You become less startled by ordinary uncertainty. You start living more and scanning less. That is healing you can feel. And this is why intellectual closure alone is not enough. You can understand every lesson in your mind and still need time for your body to catch up. So give yourself that time. Do not force. Do not shame. Do not turn recovery into another battle. Create safety repeatedly. Keep the boundaries. Build calmer routines. Stay near people who are consistent. Pay attention to what settles you. Let your body discover, through ordinary experience, that the emergency is over. Because one day you may notice that a sound that once made your heart jump no longer does. A memory comes and leaves. A night passes without replaying the old story. You wake up and realize you slept peacefully. Nothing dramatic happened, no final conversation, no perfect apology, no sudden erasing of the past. Your body simply stopped waiting for the next wound. And when that happens, another kind of grief may finally rise to the surface. Not grief for the person who hurt you. Grief for the version of yourself who stayed too long, accepted too much, and did not yet know how much better you deserved. And once your body begins to believe that the danger has passed, another feeling can finally come forward. Not fear, not anger at them. Something more private. Regret about yourself. You look back and think, why did I stay that long? Why did I accept that? Why did I keep explaining myself? Why did I keep giving chances? And sometimes the person you become most angry with is not the one who hurt you. It is the version of you who kept letting them. That kind of grief is rarely discussed, because it can feel embarrassing. You remember what you tolerated and wonder how you ever called it love. You remember the excuses you made, the warning signs you ignored, the moments when you knew something was wrong, but stayed anyway. And suddenly, you are not only mourning the relationship, you are mourning your own lost time, your energy, your confidence. The years you spent hoping someone would become different. That regret can become heavy if you are not careful, because the mind likes to judge the past with knowledge you only have now. Today, you can see the pattern clearly. Today, you know what the silence meant. Today, you know what the broken promises were telling you. Today you know that the apology was not enough. But the person you were back then did not have all of this understanding. They were living inside the story while it was still unfolding. That matters. It is easy to stand at the end of a road and say, "I should have turned sooner." It is much harder when you are still walking through fog. Back then, maybe you were hoping. Maybe you were trying to save a marriage. Maybe you were afraid of being alone. Maybe you had children to think about. Maybe your finances were tied together. Maybe you had spent 20 or 30 years building a life with that person. Maybe you believed loyalty meant enduring difficult seasons. Maybe you thought patience would eventually be rewarded. Maybe you simply loved them. Those reasons do not make you foolish. They explain why leaving was not as simple as it looks from where you stand today. That is where self-condemnation needs to soften. Not into excuses, into understanding. There is a difference between saying, "I did nothing wrong," and saying, "I understand why I made the choices I made." The second one creates wisdom. The first one can keep you blind. You can look back honestly. Maybe you did ignore your instincts. Maybe you did stay after trust had already been damaged. Maybe you did accept behavior that should have been challenged sooner. Maybe fear played a bigger role than you wanted to admit. You can own that. But ownership does not require cruelty. You do not have to insult the person you used to be. You do not have to call yourself stupid, weak, desperate, naive. Those words do not teach you anything. They only create another wound. Ask a better question. What was I needing so badly that I was willing to accept so little? That question can change everything. Maybe you needed belonging. Maybe you were terrified of starting over. Maybe you needed to feel chosen. Maybe you had been taught that leaving meant failure. Maybe you were trying to protect your family. Maybe you believed being alone would be worse than being unhappy. Maybe you did not trust yourself enough to make a difficult decision. Now you are learning. That is the point. Regret becomes useful when it gives you information. It becomes destructive when it becomes a weapon against your identity. There is a big difference between saying, "I stayed too long," and saying, "I am the kind of person who always makes terrible choices." One describes a decision. The other turns the decision into who you are. Do not do that to yourself. You are more than the worst thing you tolerated. You are more than the moment you ignored your own needs. You are more than the years you wish you could get back. And those years do not have to be completely wasted. They can become instruction. Sometimes people think healing means forgetting the person who hurt them. But part of healing is also forgiving the version of yourself who did not yet know how to leave. That can be harder. Because you were there. You remember the moments. You remember saying, "This is the last time," then staying. You remember promising yourself you would speak up, then becoming quiet again. You remember accepting another apology, another excuse, another promise. Looking back, you may feel embarrassed, but embarrassment can hide something important. You were doing what you knew how to do at the time. Maybe you had never seen healthy boundaries before. Maybe no one taught you that love can exist without endless sacrifice. Maybe you grew up watching people stay in unhappy relationships because that was what responsible adults did. Maybe you learned that being good meant being patient, no matter the cost. We do not create our emotional habits in a vacuum. We learn them from families, from culture, from what we watched, from what we survived. That does not remove responsibility, it gives context. And context helps you change without hating yourself. You can say, "This is where that pattern came from." Then decide, "It ends here." That is wisdom. Wisdom is not pretending you would make all the same choices again. Of course not. You have changed. Wisdom is taking the regret and asking it to protect your future instead of poison your present. Maybe you regret ignoring disrespect. Then the lesson becomes, I will address disrespect earlier. Maybe you regret lending money again and again. Then the lesson becomes, I will not confuse financial rescue with love. Maybe you regret staying silent to keep peace. Then the lesson becomes, I will speak before resentment grows. Maybe you regret believing promises too quickly. Then the lesson becomes, I will watch behavior over time. Do you see what is happening? Regret is changing form. It is becoming protection. That is what you want. Because if regret only says, you were foolish, it gives you nothing. But if regret says, next time notice this, then the past begins serving you. And there is another kind of grief. The grief of lost time. This can become especially painful later in life. You may think, I gave them my best years. I stayed for decades. I should have left at 40. I should have started over at 50. Now you are 65, 70, maybe older, and suddenly the past feels very expensive. Be careful here. Time already spent cannot be recovered by spending more time punishing yourself for it. That only makes the cost larger. If you lost 10 years, do not give regret another 10. You cannot go backward and rescue your younger self, but you can protect the person you are today. That is where your power is. Today, not 20 years ago, not the night you should have left, not the day you accepted the apology. Today. You still have choices. You still have mornings. You still have conversations. You still have people you can love differently. You still have boundaries you can strengthen. You still have peace you can create. The past may have taken something. Do not hand it everything. There is also grief around dignity. Maybe you did things during that relationship that do not feel like you. You begged. You chased. You checked phones. You screamed. You became jealous. You said things you regret. You accepted being treated in ways that now make you uncomfortable to remember. This can create deep shame. But shame says, that behavior proves something terrible about me. Wisdom asks, what was happening inside me when I became that version of myself? Maybe you were living in constant uncertainty. Maybe you had stopped feeling secure. Maybe you were trying desperately to hold something together. This does not make every action acceptable. If you hurt someone, own it. If you crossed a line, admit it. But do not confuse accountability with permanent self-hatred. You can say, I do not like how I behaved in that season, and then decide not to behave that way again. That is growth. The goal is not to prove that your former self was perfect. The goal is to stop treating that former self as an enemy. That person needs your understanding too. Maybe they were scared, maybe lonely, maybe exhausted, maybe trying to survive something they did not yet know how to name. They made choices with the tools they had. Now you have better tools. Use them. There is something powerful about looking back at the version of yourself who tolerated too much and changing the way you see them. At first, you may see weakness. Then you look again. Maybe there was loyalty there. Maybe there was hope. Maybe there was a desire to protect people. Maybe there was enormous endurance. Those qualities were not the problem. The problem was where they were placed. Loyalty given to someone who repeatedly broke trust can become self-abandonment. Patience without limits can become permission. Hope without evidence can become denial. Endurance without direction can keep you trapped. The answer is not to become less loyal. It is to become more discerning about who receives your loyalty, not less patient. More aware of when patience has stopped helping, not hopeless. More careful about where you place hope. That is transformation. You take the quality and add wisdom to it. Now the person you once were is not someone to hate. They are someone whose experience taught you how to live differently. You can even feel tenderness toward them. I wish you had known. I wish you had trusted yourself sooner. I wish you had understood that love did not require all of that. But then comes the most important part. You know now. That is where regret should end, not with punishment, with a promise. A promise that the person you are today will not betray the person you were then by repeating the same pattern. You honor your past self by protecting your present self. You honor the years you lost by refusing to lose more. You honor the pain by using what it taught you. And slowly, embarrassment becomes compassion. Anger becomes clarity. Regret becomes instruction. You stop looking backward just to accuse yourself. You look backward to gather wisdom. Then you turn around. Because you are still here, still capable of choosing, still capable of becoming someone your younger self desperately needed. And maybe that is one of the deepest forms of closure. Not getting the past back. Becoming the person who will not abandon yourself in the same way again. And when that happens, the next shift begins. You stop measuring your healing by whether the person who hurt you notices. Their message, their regret, their new relationship, their silence, their next move begins to matter less. Because real closure arrives when what they do next no longer decides what kind of day you are going to have. And once you stop punishing the version of yourself who stayed too long, something inside you begins to loosen. You stop looking backward quite so often. And then a new question appears. How much power does this person still have over the day you are living now? Because sometimes a relationship has ended, but your mood is still waiting for their next move. If they message you, your heart races. If they do not message you, you feel rejected. If you hear they are doing well, something inside you sinks. If you hear they are struggling, part of you feels relief. If they apologize, hope returns. If they stay silent, anger returns. If they start a new relationship, old wounds open. And without realizing it, your emotional life is still moving according to someone who may no longer even be part of your life. That is not closure yet. Closure is not forgetting them. It is reaching the point where what they do next no longer decides what happens inside you. That is a very different kind of freedom, because you may never forget what happened. Certain memories may always exist. A song may remind you. A place may bring something back. You may hear their name 20 years from now and remember exactly how that season felt. Memory is not the enemy. The question is whether the memory still has authority. Can it enter without taking over? Can you remember without losing the rest of your day? Can you hear news about them without immediately falling into comparison, anger, hope, or regret? That is where healing becomes visible. Not in forgetting, in reduced control. Think about how much emotional power a simple notification can carry. Your phone lights up. You see their name. Before you even read the message, your body reacts. Your mind starts running ahead. What do they want? Are they apologizing? Do they miss me? Did something happen? Should I answer? A 5-word message can suddenly become the center of your entire evening. That shows you something. The person may not have physical access to your life anymore, but they still have emotional access. And emotional access can remain open long after every other door has closed. This is why healing sometimes requires learning not to treat every action from them as an event. A message is a message. It is not automatically a sign. It is not destiny. It is not proof that they changed. It is not proof that you should return. It is information. You can read it later. You can choose not to respond. You can respond briefly. You can decide what it means after your emotions settle. That pause is powerful, because when you stop reacting immediately, you begin recovering choice. And choice is where freedom lives. The same thing can happen with silence. For a long time, perhaps their silence controlled you more than their words. No message today. You wonder why. 3 days pass. You check your phone. A week passes. You start thinking maybe they have moved on. Then you become sad or angry or tempted to contact them. Silence becomes a message you keep trying to decode. But one day, silence begins to mean nothing more than silence. They did not contact you today, and your day continued. You made breakfast. You spoke to someone you love. You handled your responsibilities. You watched something that made you laugh. You went to sleep. Nothing inside you collapsed. That ordinary day is more important than it looks. Because your nervous system is learning that their absence is no longer an emergency, then there is the possibility that they move on. Maybe you hear they are seeing someone else. Maybe they remarry. Maybe pictures appear. Maybe someone says, they seem really happy. That can hurt even after you thought you were finished. Not necessarily because you want them back. Sometimes it hurts because you start comparing. Why are they giving someone else what I begged for? Why do they look happier now? Was I the problem? Did they suddenly become better after losing me? Be careful. You are seeing a moment, perhaps a photograph, a second-hand story, a public version of a private life. You do not know what happens behind that image. And more importantly, you do not need to know. Their new relationship is not the final grade on your old one. If they become a wonderful partner to someone else, that does not mean you deserved what happened to you. People can change. Timing can change. Circumstances can change. And sometimes appearances are simply appearances. None of those possibilities require you to investigate. Their next chapter does not rewrite yours. That sentence matters, because comparison can make you return emotionally to a story you had already left. You start studying their life instead of living your own. Who are they with? Where did they go? Do they look happy? Did they buy a new house? Are they traveling? Did they become successful? And every piece of information creates another feeling. That is how curiosity becomes attachment. You tell yourself you are only checking. But every check keeps a small emotional thread alive. And sometimes healing requires cutting the flow of information. Not because you are bitter, because you have learned that knowing too much about their life costs you peace. You do not need updates. You do not need photographs. You do not need mutual friends reporting every development. You can allow someone to have a life that you no longer monitor. That is powerful. Their success may also affect you. Maybe after they hurt you, part of you secretly expected life to punish them. Not because you are cruel, because you wanted justice. You thought, one day they will understand what they lost. Then they seem to succeed. Their career grows, their finances improve. They travel, they look happy, and something inside you protests. How can they be doing so well after what they did? That question can keep bitterness alive, because now your peace depends on life delivering consequences you can see. But life does not always work that way. People who hurt us do not always receive visible punishment. Sometimes they prosper. Sometimes they are admired. Sometimes they never publicly face what they did. If your healing requires their suffering, you remain tied to their life. You have to keep watching to see whether justice arrived. That is another prison. A quieter one. Freedom is being able to say, their success has nothing to do with my healing. They can become rich, famous, loved, successful. None of that changes what happened, and none of it changes what you deserve now. The same is true if their life falls apart. Maybe they lose something. A relationship ends. Their health declines. Their finances suffer. Someone treats them badly. You may hear the news and think, now they understand. That feeling can be tempting. It can feel like justice finally arrived. But be careful not to make their suffering your medicine, because then you still need something from them. Only now, instead of needing an apology, you need their pain. That is still dependence. Real freedom does not require them to suffer. It does not require them to regret losing you. It does not require them to spend nights thinking about what they did. Maybe they will. Maybe they will not. Your life has to become bigger than that question. Regret can also pull you back. Maybe years later they return and finally say everything you once wanted to hear. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I should have treated you better. I never found anyone like you. I wish I could go back. There was once a time when hearing those words might have felt like victory. But healing changes what victory means. The old version of you wanted them to regret losing you. The healed version of you may simply feel calm, not cruel, not excited, not desperate to reopen the past. Just calm. You can hear the apology and think, I appreciate that. And then continue with your life. That is enormous, because now the apology is no longer oxygen. It is simply information arriving late. You already learned how to breathe without it. That may be one of the clearest signs that the story is ending inside you. You no longer need their regret to prove your value. You no longer need their loneliness to prove that you mattered. You no longer need their return to prove that leaving you was a mistake. You know what you brought to the relationship. You know what you learned from it. You know what you are building now. That knowledge becomes enough. And there is another emotional trap. The urge to show them how well you are doing. You dress better, travel, build something, find new love, become happier. And somewhere inside, you hope they see it. You hope someone tells them. You hope they regret losing you. That can feel like moving on. But sometimes it is still a conversation with them. You are simply having it through your life. Look what you lost. Look how happy I am. Look what I became without you. There is nothing wrong with improving your life after pain. Do it. Become stronger. Travel. Laugh. Love again. Build. Grow. But eventually, let those things belong to you. Your happiness should not become a performance for someone who is no longer in the audience. There is a beautiful moment in healing when you realize you have done something wonderful and they do not cross your mind. You do not wonder whether they would be impressed. You do not wish they could see you. You simply enjoy it. That is freedom. Your joy has stopped being a message. It has become your life. And slowly the emotional strings disappear. Their silence does not punish you. Their message does not rescue you. Their new relationship does not diminish you. Their success does not defeat you. Their problems do not heal you. Their apology does not complete you. Their regret does not validate you. Their opinion does not define you. They become what they were always supposed to become after the relationship ended. A person with their own life. And you become a person with yours, separate. Not enemies, not unfinished halves. Just two human beings whose paths crossed, changed something, and eventually moved apart. That is what the real ending can look like. It may not come with one dramatic moment. You may not wake up and suddenly feel nothing. It often happens quietly. One day you hear their name and continue eating dinner. One day an old photograph appears and you smile at the memory instead of collapsing into it. One day someone tells you news about them and you do not ask another question. One day you realize you have not checked their page in months. One day their birthday passes and you notice only afterward. One day you understand that the emotional weather of your life no longer changes when their name appears. That is closure, not amnesia, not hatred, not proving that you never cared. It is freedom from reaction. You remember, but you remain yourself. And perhaps that is why the final stage of closure can feel almost strange. After spending so long searching for answers, defending yourself, waiting for apologies, watching patterns, building boundaries, and learning to trust yourself again, there comes a morning when nothing has been perfectly resolved. Some questions are still unanswered. Some memories are still imperfect. Some parts of the story will always remain unfinished. And yet, for the first time, you no longer feel the need to complete them, because the missing piece has stopped feeling necessary. And maybe this is what you needed to hear tonight. Closure was never meant to be something another person hands back to you. It is not hidden inside their apology, their explanation, their regret, or the version of the story they choose to tell. It begins when you stop asking them to confirm what you already know, when you trust the patterns, when you protect your peace, when you forgive without reopening the door, when you stop measuring your worth by how badly someone failed to value it. Some questions may remain unanswered. Some memories may still visit. Some parts of the story may never make perfect sense. But that does not mean you have to keep living inside them. By mourning, you do not need to forget what happened. You only need to realize that it no longer gets to decide who you are, what you deserve, or where your life goes next. And if you are ready to stop waiting for someone else to give you peace, leave these 4 words in the comments. I choose my peace. Let that be your quiet promise to yourself tonight. And if these words helped you release even a little of what you have been carrying, subscribe to the channel. There is more wisdom ahead for the life you are still becoming. Sleep peacefully. The missing answer can stay missing. You can still be free.